I'm a logical person, and I do consider myself a skeptic, even though I know what I saw, and I know that it really happened. Maybe it's just that I tend to be skeptical about most things. I will, as briefly as I can, describe a little history of the house and the changes my family made to it, because I believe that it applies to what I experienced. I'm originally from a small farming town in Washington State. My parents bought a ranch-style house in this town in the early 1980s, and we lived there until early 1993. The house was built in the mid-1950s, and was known as a party house in the 1970s when my parents were in high school. My parents did a lot of work on the house, as it was a little run down when they bought it. There were many holes punched in the walls and doors. The original hardwood floors were in rough shape, and the family room and original master bedroom had disgusting, torn, brown and lime green shag carpeting. The original master bedroom also had wood paneling on the walls. We tore out all the paneling and replaced the horrifying shag carpets with vinyl and new carpeting and renovated the bathrooms. The main change that my parents did to the house was they added a new master bedroom to the back of the house and converted the old master bedroom to a large laundry room / sewing and crafts room for my mom. The new master bedroom was added onto the other side of the master bedroom from the original master bedroom turned laundry room. I include all of this because during college, I mentioned what happened in this house to a friend of mine who was really into the paranormal, and he suggested that the renovations my parents did, in combination with it being a former party house where there had been drug use and possibly violence, had stirred something up. So one side of the house was set up as follows, from front to back. Family room, the new laundry room, the master bathroom, then the new master bedroom at the back. The kitchen was to the right of the family room if you were facing the door to the laundry room, and could be partially seen from the family room. Now to my experiences. The Void Man. I do not know how old I was when I first saw it, or how old I was when I last saw it. I lived in the house until just before my 8th birthday. I was between 5 and 7. That much I do know. I mostly saw it when I was in the family room. It would stand perfectly still in the doorway from the family room to the laundry room. It seemed to be staring at me, but it had no eyes. It was a pitch-black void in the shape of a human. There were no discernible facial or other body features on it. It was a body with a head on top. The outline of the body appeared to be slightly fuzzy or misty. I would say it was over 6 feet tall. I should also mention that no one who lived in the house was that tall. My mom was maybe 5'3", my dad is 5'7", and my brother was a toddler at this time, so it couldn't be me misremembering any of them. I would just stand there and stare back at it. I felt frozen and didn't know what to do or say. I felt like I couldn't speak if I wanted to when it was there. I remember feeling a sinking sensation when I saw it. I have one distinct memory of staring at it in the doorway to the laundry room, and I could see my mom working in the kitchen. She was standing at the stove and could have seen it if she had turned her head to her right. She did not notice it. I named it the Void Man at some point. Staring at it was like staring into a deep void, a void that would swallow me up. I don't remember feeling fear exactly when I saw the full shadow person. It was more that I couldn't feel anything. That was not the case for the other way that I would see it. It would like to peek its head around the door frames at me. It would do it several times in rapid succession. That would terrify me. I think that was its intention. I would usually go running off to my room or to go find my mom. I only ever saw the full body of the Void Man from the family room looking into the laundry room, but it would peek its head out at me from both of the laundry room doors. the one leading into the family room, and the one leading into the master bathroom. If my parents ever saw anything, they had never mentioned it, and I have never mentioned it to them. I'm sure that there are those out there that will say, well, you were very young, you must be remembering wrong, or you made it up at some point and then it became real to you over time. I wish this was the case. I really do. But I remember the Void Man very vividly. I know that I saw this thing, whatever it was. We moved out of that house in 1993 and moved into one that we had built. I have never seen anything like what I did in that house ever again, but the experience has followed me my entire life. I have a nervousness about open doors and what I might see on the other side. So about 2 years ago, a friend of mine had moved into his own apartment. The sofa that was in it was old and worn, so he decided that he would try and find a new one in better condition. He asked me to help him look for one, as my dad had a van, and we would need to use that to transport the sofa, so we went on Craigslist to have a look at what other people had for sale. We came across one ad that stated a 3-seater cream leather sofa, great condition, free to first viewer. There was a picture of it, and it looked to be in perfect shape. Now, the ad had been up for a week, so we thought that maybe it was already gone, and that they just hadn't taken it down yet. So my friend contacted the seller, and nearly instantly got a reply saying that they still had the sofa, and that it was available if we wanted to collect it. I was a bit wary that it was still available. I mean, a free sofa in perfect condition that had been up for a week, and no one had taken it yet? We thought that maybe there was something wrong with it that could only be noticed when viewing the sofa in person that was maybe hidden in the pictures. It was a weekend, and we had no plans, so we decided that we would go and check it out. My friend contacted the seller back again and organized a time and place to meet up. They decided on a local McDonald's car park at 9 p.m. as the seller said he was at work until 8 p.m. and would need time to get ready after that. The seller said he would be driving a green Honda Accord with a trailer. So we pulled up to the McDonald's car park about 8:50. There were loads of people around, so we had no reason to think that we would be in any danger or anything. At about 8:55, my friend got a text saying that the seller was about 15 minutes away, and they asked him to describe what vehicle we were in, so we described the van. About 5 minutes after he had texted the seller saying what vehicle we were in, an overweight man around 50 years old with a gray scruffy beard and greasy hair approached the driver's side window of the van, which was my side. He was wearing a plain white t-shirt and what looked like food stains all over it, with black jeans with holes torn in them and dried mud stains all over, along with a pair of black steel-toed boots also covered in dried mud. He knocked on my window, so I rolled it down a bit. "You boys here for the sofa?" he said in a gravelly voice. It sounded like he needed to cough, but couldn't get it out. Yeah?" I said to him. "Rob's car is broken down just the road, and his phone battery has died. I was with him and I walked up to get to you guys. He's with the car waiting for AAA, but you can come down and collect the sofa off of him." Me and my friend both looked at each other, unsure of what to think. "Can I get in the van and we'll go back to Rob together?" the guy asked. "How far down the road is he?" I asked right before he replied, "Not too far, but I need to show you where to go." At this stage, my friend pretended to get a phone call. "Hello? Yes? Oh, no way, really? We'll be right there," he said before pretending to hang up his phone. He looked at me and said, "We gotta go. My dad needs us to help him with a flat tire." I nodded, knowing that it was a fake call for us to get the heck away from this creepy dude. "Hey man, we'll just contact you tomorrow about the sofa." The guy just stared at us as I rolled up my window and we started to drive away. My friend and I looked at each other. "That was creepy. I got really bad vibes off that guy," my friend said. "Definitely," I replied to him. We decided to drive around to the back of the car park to see if we could find out what the guy was up to. We could see him standing in the same spot where we had left him, and he was on the phone. He put his phone down, and about 2 minutes after that, a car pulled up with 3 men in it, and he got in. My friend's phone started ringing, and it was the number of Rob, the guy who was supposedly giving away the sofa. He answered, "Hey, can you meet tomorrow, and I can hold on to the sofa for you until then?" As he was on the phone, I noticed one of the men in the car that had collected the creepy guy was also on the phone. My friend told Rob that he would contact him tomorrow, that he was busy and couldn't talk on the phone right now. At the same time that my friend hung up the phone, the guy who was in the car also finished his phone call. At this point, I explained to my friend that there probably was no car that had broken down and that the creepy guy was trying to lure us somehow so that the guys in the car could do God knows what to us. We drove home and my friend blocked the number of Rob, and we never heard from them again. We reported the ad, and it was removed the next day. This experience left me pretty shaken up for a while. To begin, I was a fairly depressed and antisocial 15-year-old in high school, and on weekends I'd go and stay with my older sister in her apartment to get away from my parents and finally just relax. During this time, I'd gotten into studying astral projection, and I'd always been interested in the paranormal, as my mom and I had experienced things in our house, and my mom claimed that she could see the spirits. Anyway, one day after some reading, I decided to take the bus over to Toys R Us, where they still to this day sell Ouija boards to kids. I bought one of the silly glow-in-the-dark ones. My sister and I were really excited to start using it. Within a few minutes of putting our hands on the planchette, it began moving in a circle. Our first introduction was a little girl named Sarah. We end up chatting with this little spirit all night. Then, it turns into every single weekend. We begin to feel almost addicted to the board, always going to chat with Sarah. It was a long time ago, but I remember her saying that she was from the 1800s. She'd be so excited to talk every time we showed up. The planchette would spin in circles all over the board. We could even take our hands off of it, and it would continue to move. The addiction to the board goes on for months. Finally, one day we decide to ask Sarah to physically show us that she exists. We ask for a sign, and a strong breeze shoots straight into my ear so hard that I jumped back from the board. There was no AC on, no windows open, and no fans in the room. From here on, things get odd, and Sarah says that she is attached to me. I started getting an off feeling, and I ask, "Are you really Sarah, or are you someone else? Some of the things you say are pretty adult for a young girl." Then the planchette began to playfully spin all over the place, ending on "no." I feel a sense of almost maniacal laughter in the air. It's hard to explain, but my sister feels it too. Turns out Sarah was actually a man named Solomon. Solomon said that he loved me and that he was going to follow me. From there, we were freaked out and decided to stop using the board, but the pull was strong, and it legitimately feels as if it were an addiction. After this incident, I can almost always feel someone watching me when I'm alone. I'd see the shape of a man in my head, and the dark windows at night, but just for a second, enough to make me think I was losing my mind. I was frequently exploring church with my sister and was so scared from seeing figures pass by the windows and from feeling someone standing behind me that I told the preacher about our Ouija board use. He said he would pray and that I would have to ignore the spirit. Not the greatest advice. A month later, I had an odd and terrifying dream. Suddenly I'm above my body and in the den in my parents' house where I'd fallen asleep on the couch late at night. I look down at myself and then feel a presence by my body's head behind the couch near the hallway. There is a man standing there. He's wearing a black leather jacket, fitted, vintage-looking jeans, dark boots, kind of 40s, 50s-ish biker style. He was probably in his mid-20s. He had pale skin, dark, short-cut hair, and totally black eyes. He's almost attractive, if he weren't terrifying. He smiles at me eerily, and at light speed, jumps for my body. I panic and jump too, trying to get back into my body before he does. I wake up in a panic, sweating and shaking. Somehow, I eventually fall asleep at first light. And then when I awaken in the late afternoon, my mom tells me that she woke up to use the bathroom at night and fell to the ground in the living room having a seizure. I didn't know what to do or say. I was shocked. Could it have been from the paranormal encounter? Because she's a sensitive too? She used antidepressants frequently and switched them around a lot. But what a strange coincidence for it to happen that night. After that incident, life just continued on. So much of my teenage life felt negative at that age already that I just kept trekking forward, feeling someone behind me on some days not. The energy in my family's home was generally bad. Parents fighting constantly, father using drugs, mom in different phases of her bipolar. Definitely some energy a bad spirit or two could feed on. Fast forward to sophomore year in high school. I used to sit in the corner in band doing homework quietly, and one day a girl known as the school witch comes up to me. We'd maybe talked a few times, but didn't know each other very well. She simply states, "So there's a man following you, a spirit. I'm going to do a spell for you tonight to make him leave." Once again shocked, I tell her that there has been someone following me. She nods like, yes, obviously, then walks away before I can say anything else. By junior year, I'm dating a boy who lost his brother to suicide only months before we'd met. One night he calls in a panic and states that he was brutally attacked by a male spirit or demon in a dreamlike yet awake state. He said he felt someone sitting on him and could see a black spirit in the room. He called his brother's spirit to save him. He claims he felt a whoosh of energy and that his brother pushed the spirit off of his chest. He woke up really scared, saying that he'd never felt anything like it and that he'd never had negative spirit encounters before except as a small child. What scares me is that he'd randomly have episodes after this that made him not in his right mind or almost mad. At the time, I'd felt and seen his brother's spirit twice, and it was never a hostile feeling. I felt somewhat protected while dating him because of this, but Solomon's negative spirit was something I still worried about and felt on occasion. Years go by, and I eventually become best friends with a girl whose family ghost hunts. We ghost hunt together, experience some creepy stuff, and I become less fearful. 2 years into our relationship, I get the courage to tell her psychic aunt my story, and she seeks to find out more about this spirit. She connects with him and laughs some. He's 5150, hun. He's absolutely mad. He's not necessarily evil, but he attached himself to you because he likes how easily he can scare you. He doesn't necessarily want to hurt you, but your fear gives him pleasure. In life, it seems, he was quite mentally ill. I was absolutely stunned. It all made so much sense, and how would she know this? After the talk, my best friend and her aunt tell him to F off, and to imagine a white light and to let him know he's not welcome. This seems forward, but one night I feel the presence and it angers me. Years of someone just wanting to scare me. I yell at the empty room that I'm not afraid of him and that he's not welcome. I use sage, imagine white light, and yell for him to leave. I feel a stir in the energy, almost like he's not even that angry to leave. It felt more like an annoyance at losing his fear target. From that point on, I've had the upper hand. There was one more experience with him one day at 25 while in a toxic living situation. This was 6 years after the experience with my friend's aunt. I left my body again and was excited. Finally, astral projecting as an adult. I sit up, and lo and behold, there he is, standing by the bed. But this time I shoot white light at him. He's gone in an instant. Then my toxic roommate at the time walks through the wall to grab me. I wake up. Was he trying to warn me? Does he still visit me? Can I ever make him leave for good? Sometimes I wonder if he ever felt compassion for me. It was all so strange, and I frequently meditate and banish negative spirits or energy from around me. I've shut down a lot spiritually because of these incidents. I constantly state that nothing is allowed to bother me, but I wonder if somehow he'll be there forever. It worries me sometimes, especially because he'd stated on the board that he didn't want anyone to have me. I feel confident that spiritually I am strong, but I've always wondered if there was some deeper level of banishing that I could have, or should have done, or could still do. Anyway, I wanted to share this story because it's been both such a weight and a mystery to me for so many years. I don't know what I believe anymore. Sometimes I wonder if my extremely negative state of mind drew him to my depressed teenage self. Maybe somehow I created this negative entity? I doubt that one, but it is still possible. I feel in a much better place mentally, physically, and spiritually now, so I don't feel threatened by spirits, or really believe that he is around anymore. But who knows? I sage and cleanse my place almost daily and feel it to be a safe and light space. I will say that there is still so much I don't know when it comes to all of those incidents. This happened back when I was a freshman in high school. I had this friend who lived next door to me and asked me to accompany him to Dairy Queen to buy a vape from some girl from his school. We'll call him Tyler. After school, I met up with Tyler at our apartment complex since school had just let out for him as well. We walked to Dairy Queen, which was about 1.5 miles, roughly, up the street. This was in the middle of winter, so it was very cold and rainy. The walk took about 30 minutes. We arrived at the Dairy Queen and waited for an hour for this girl who never showed up. She eventually texted Tyler after an hour of telling him she was getting ready and said that she was unable to get a ride, which was total BS, because she apparently lived right by the Dairy Queen. We were annoyed and started our walk back home. We were talking about how we were going to hit the hot tub when we returned. Now, for some understanding, there is a large Walmart that you had to get past to get to the Dairy Queen. Before you get to the Walmart, there's another apartment complex that we also had to pass. A girl named Carly lived there, and was dating our friend named Dre. We stopped at her apartment because Tyler saw her outside taking her trash out and wanted to flirt with her, which is something he would do with every girl that he came across. She was visibly upset, and you could tell that she had been crying. She told Tyler that Dre had dumped her. Now, for a bit of context, Dre was once friends with Tyler, but they had a falling out a few days prior to this story. We all three would hang out at the apartment complex that Tyler and I lived at, and Dre was actually a longtime family friend of mine, too. After a few minutes of Tyler and Carly chatting, we finally left and headed home. As we were about to pass Walmart, there was a big bush on the sidewalk in front of the Walmart. As we were walking, we saw 2 dark figures emerge from behind the bush and look in our direction. Tyler had a lot of enemies, so he was paranoid that there was someone coming after him. I told him not to worry, as it could have been anyone, and it was probably just some random homeless people, as this area was full of random transients. He suggested we cut through the back alley behind Walmart because he was fully convinced it was someone who wanted to jump him. I'll admit, I was a bit nervous myself, as I wasn't sure what kind of enemies that he had, or what they wanted, and I was afraid that they might do something to me since I was with Tyler, which, in hindsight, was probably a bit selfish, but I was a kid. We decided to just continue down the sidewalk we were on, and take our chances agreeing to just book it if they tried anything. The closer we got, the sketchier the whole situation became, because these people just kept peeking around the bushes at us. Once we got to the bush, I was surprised to see Dre and a well-known thug, future murderer, named D, come out from behind it. Dre looked pissed, and D had a weird grin on his face that made me know that they were up to no good. I also noticed that D was holding his cell phone at a weird angle, like he was recording or something. That made me extremely nervous. Dre and D just walked up to us on the sidewalk, with D still awkwardly smirking, and Dre asked where we were coming from. I didn't say anything, as I didn't want to be involved in the beef that Dre and Tyler had with each other. Tyler began to try and explain to Dre that we were coming back from Dairy Queen and that we had run into Dre's girlfriend Carly and that Carly was upset over their breakup. Dre didn't believe him, and accused him of trying to hit on her. He said that they never broke up, and accused Tyler of lying. Tyler attempted to get me involved by looking at me as if he expected me to confirm that Carly in fact had said that they broke up. I froze and just shrugged my shoulders, and tried to make it clear that I wanted no part of anything. Dre didn't say anything for a few seconds, and then after an awkward silence, Tyler attempted to part ways and walk up the street after saying goodbye. All of a sudden, Dre shoved Tyler to the ground, and then sucker punched him in his face as he crawled back to his feet. D began hysterically laughing in a very menacing way, and I just stood there looking at Dre, waiting for him to come after me next. You see, the night before this, I had gotten into it with Dre over a text and called him a little bitch because he wouldn't forgive Tyler. I know that was immature now. He walked past me without doing anything, and walked up the street in the opposite direction. Now by this point, Tyler was hysteric and started running up the street yelling at me to come on or they would get me, and I was trying to keep up with him. He yelled at me for not helping him. At that moment, Tyler's mom pulled up next to us and we got into her car and she drove us home. He was crying and he told her what had happened. She seemed kind of dismissive about the whole thing and said to just stay away from Dre. I was just happy to be away from the situation. Tyler went straight to his house and didn't talk to me again for a few days. I guess he was still mad at me about not helping him. In my defense, everything happened so fast that I didn't really know what to do. Dre ended up texting me after I got home just saying, "Hey," but I ignored it. The next encounter with D was a bit more alarming, as he apparently did indeed want to get me next. Tyler and I were just hanging out at the apartments one day when he got a text from one of his friends that Dre and D were smoking weed at the supermarket right next door to the apartments. Apparently, Dre told D about how I was best friends with Tyler and had been quote-unquote talking smack, to which D responded by suggesting that they walk over to my apartments to beat me up. Dre told him no, because we were family friends, so that was the end of that. I didn't see D again until high school when he was put into my algebra class. He walked into the classroom with that same creepy smile on his face that he always seemed to have, and sat down across from my desk. He turned to me during a quiz and asked me if I remember him, to which I replied the affirmative. He asked me if I remember Dre, and when Dre punched Tyler, and once again, I said yes. This kid went on about how he enjoyed watching Dre do that to Tyler, and he actually had 2 knives in his pocket that day and wanted to use them on Tyler, but Dre wouldn't let him. So fast forward to 2018, I was walking around Sears with my fiancé trying to find baby clothes for our son, who was due soon. I hadn't heard anything about Dre or D since high school, and I received a text from an old buddy from school telling me that D got arrested for allegedly shooting some girl in the back of the head at a party. Apparently, she refused to sell him cocaine, so he shot her in a fit of rage. He fled the scene and was arrested soon after that on attempted murder charges, since the girl survived. She ended up making a full recovery. This wasn't even the first time D has shot someone. A year prior, he had shot some kid in the leg during a drug deal gone bad. I'm not sure if Dre is still friends with D, but as far as I know, he's not involved in the things he used to be involved with. So to the psycho who plotted to jump me and shot 2 people, let's not meet again. My mom had always told me that I was gifted. I could always feel energies. I had dreams of things that would come to happen. I wouldn't say I'm a medium or anything like that. I've never communicated with spirits. More so, I'd say I attract them. We hopped apartments a lot when I was younger, and no matter where we went, an entity would immediately find me. I'd have recurring nightmares, see figures, be scratched, etc. You could say spirits like to pick on me. Another random fact that will come into play later. I had bright blue eyes, like my mother. We moved into this apartment, and things immediately went very, very poorly. I had a dream that only lasted seconds. I was in a bright white room, and there was this beast on the ceiling, and it looked into my eyes and roared. It was so incredibly loud. I woke up, and my mom and her boyfriend at the time had rushed to my aid because they heard me let out a scream that sounded like a deep, full-grown man's scream, not a prepubescent boy's. My eyes turned hazel with brown splotches, and have been that way ever since. I was terrified. We moved me into my big brother's room. That night, I felt a presence, opened my eyes, and I saw a shadowy figure reach out and try to grab me. I sprinted out of the room and slept next to my mom or on the couch in the living room from then on, but I always felt watched from the hallway leading to my bedroom. Another thing that happened was when I was laying in bed with my mom and her boyfriend, she looked up and saw a little girl in a petticoat standing in the hallway. He saw it too. I was asleep and only knew this because they told me years later. Anyhow, everyone was being terrorized for months, and eventually we had enough. We hired someone to come in, and she immediately detected a demonic presence. She had informed us that the building used to be a medical waste facility. They'd dispose of and store blood in the basement. That sort of thing. My mom has told me since that she was able to confirm this detail, but to be truthful, I never asked how. Thinking about and speaking about this incident brings me terrible feelings. Anyhow, she blessed the place, and it didn't really do anything. We tried writing scripture on the walls and this sort of highlighter stuff that you could only see in UV light. We put up some crosses, that sort of thing. It only served to make whatever it was angrier. We eventually moved out, and my mom spoke clearly as we left. "We're leaving. You are not allowed to follow us." I've never had another experience with a spirit. A friend of mine who says that she is a medium, I'm not sure what I believe about this sort of thing, told me that maybe God, maybe a spirit, maybe myself, walled myself off spiritually from my gift. I think that maybe it was the same spirit tormenting me my entire life up until that point. When I think about this, tears immediately begin pouring from my eyes. I'm 20 now, and this was easily one of the most turbulent times of my life. I was riding my bike down a long road with almost zero vehicles on it. I was in the dedicated bike lane, scooting along as I'd done hundreds of times before down this stretch of road. There's about 3 feet of opening gap between the curb of this road and the bike lane, followed by a 3-foot wide bike lane, and then finally the vehicle lane. Vehicles are not allowed to park in the gap or bike lane unless they're the city maintenance vehicle crews. Vehicles are not Vehicles are not allowed to park in the gap or the bike lane unless they're the city maintenance crews that service the road, grass, and noise walls of this particular stretch. Well, this day there was a big blue moving truck parked right on the curb, wide enough to take up the empty 3-foot gap and the 3-foot wide bike lane and spill over into the vehicle lane. I thought, no big deal, as there weren't any cars behind me and I had plenty of space to move into the road to go around it. The spot where the truck was stopped was the only spot on the stretch of road where the shrubbery from the other side of the noise wall was growing into the ground and out the other side. It sticks out like a sore thumb. But anyway, as I was going around the truck and into the vehicle lane, the door to the cab of the truck flew open forcefully right as I was about to pass it. I'm talking like the person that threw it open was trying their best to hurt me and waited for the best opportunity. At the last second, I clenched my teeth, swerved out of the way, and just instinctively swerved back into the bike lane and came to a stop. Angry and full of adrenaline, I screamed at them what was their problem, that they could have killed me, while dismounting my bike and making my way to the truck. This is where it got strange. There was no one inside the truck itself. I went back toward it, and there was no one outside of the truck either. It was really just there, with the door still wide open. There was nowhere anyone could have slipped away to. The noise walls are there to spare the neighboring homes from car noises, and they're about 10 feet tall, and they stretch out for a good quarter mile, with no open gaps anywhere. I went around to the back of the truck, and it was open and empty. Nothing in it, no hiding spots. Just an empty truck and an empty cab. I decided to just jump on my bike and go home. I pushed it out of my head and considered myself lucky to be unharmed. That lasted about a day. I can't help but feel like I was in some moment in time that somehow got stuck. Upon remembering the occurrence, there was almost no sound. No other cars driving by, no birds chirping, no wind blowing on what was actually a fairly windy day. It wasn't until I got closer to my home that everything felt normal again, and I was able to move past it. Now it plagues me that I didn't take a photo with my phone or didn't look for one of those "How's my driving" stickers to report the truck. It's one of those glitches that I'm just gonna have to wonder about forever. This happened to me when I was in high school. I was at my friend's house at the time, who lived in an apartment building. She had a neighbor who lived upstairs, and was a few years younger than us, who we hung out with when I visited my friend's apartment. On this specific day, my friend's neighbor mentioned that she had a Ouija board, and asked if we wanted to use it with her. We both agreed, as I personally didn't think Ouija boards were actually paranormal, and thought it was a myth. We went into a garage area of the apartment building and put our fingers on the planchette. For the first few hours, nothing really even happened. Eventually, we had movement on the planchette and started asking questions to this spirit, who would answer us. I forgot who, but someone asked if the spirit was trying to communicate with anyone. Interestingly enough, it spelled out my name. I was skeptical, and thought it was one of my friends messing with me, so I asked what its name was. It then spelled out my grandmother's name, who died 6 months before this Ouija board encounter. I started getting a little uncomfortable, as my grandmother's name is in another language, and my friends did not know this language, nor have I ever told them what her name was. They wouldn't even know how to spell it either. Weirded out, I asked what my grandmother wanted. She started spelling out URGR, and then the planchette started going in weird circles, and even going off of the board, and wasn't spelling out anything that made sense. So I asked for further clarification, and then just "You are great" popped up. This will be important later, so keep that in mind. Anyway, at that point I thought it was just one of us moving it weirdly, so I said goodbye. A few days later, my grandmother's husband, my grandfather, suddenly passed away. It was unexpected, as he was in great health, and it was right before Christmas, and he was so excited for Christmas. As I was at his funeral, I remembered sitting there and thinking about the Ouija board, and that's when it hit me. When my grandmother initially tried to spell out something that started with GR, I realized that grandfather starts with GR. But then the planchette had moved around so weirdly when my grandmother couldn't spell out the rest of the word, as if something had been stopping my grandmother from completing the word and warning me. The next few months were hell, as I started blaming myself, and was convinced that I had somehow contributed to my grandfather's death by using this board. It got to the point that I became suicidal, and the scariest part is, my thoughts felt as if they were not my own. As if something were trying to lead me toward taking my life, as they were very dark. I can't explain it, as it could have been guilt, but I felt like something was watching me all the time and felt a strange presence in the next few months after using the board. There's also the fact that the night of when I used the Ouija board, I was in the bathroom and I was underneath some lights. I had a strange sensation and felt that I needed to walk away, but right when I did, the lights shattered and would have injured me if I had been standing underneath. I eventually confessed to my mother about the Ouija board experience, and right when I did, I felt a giant weight lift off of my shoulders. The negative and dark thoughts were slowly disappearing, and I started to not feel the dark presence anymore when I overcame these thoughts. However, I was still wondering if the spirit that I had contacted was even really my grandmother. I also wondered if I was imagining this dark presence and the dark thoughts that I had had. Fast forward, I was at an overnight event at my school and another friend brought a Ouija board. I decided to use it one more time with this friend and try to get some answers. At one point, the Ouija board said that it was trying to contact me specifically. When we asked who it was, it then started spelling out D-E-V. We started panicking, but then it spelled out to a word that I forgot. I dismissed it and thought it was nothing, but my friend decided to look up the word. A few weeks later, she told me that the word meant devil in another language. It was then confirmed to me that it may not have been my grandmother who was contacting me the first time. There's also the fact that there may have been something that was trying to get to me and did not have good intentions. To this day, I am convinced that this spirit only tried to warn me about my grandfather so that when he passed, I would have felt guilty. By feeling guilty, I was more vulnerable to the spirit's influences, to the point that I would almost take my own life. I do not know if this is what actually happened, but it's the only logical explanation that I have. This encounter happened in the summer of 2006, when I was 20 years old. I didn't get my driver's license until January of that year, and driving opened up so many doors for me that I took a lot of solo road trips from my friends' houses in New England and the mid-Atlantic states. I also look young for my age, and was often mistaken for a high school student in my early 20s. I was driving alone on I-78 on a random July day on my way to visit my friend in southern Pennsylvania for a long weekend. Her parents were away, and we had the house to ourselves and were planning on drinking and hot tubbing, watching Planet Earth drunk. It had just come out. Maybe run around some cornfields at night. I was so excited and had a great drive listening to good music, and it was a beautiful day. Right after I crossed the border from New Jersey into Pennsylvania, I stopped at one of the rest stops to get gas and snacks for the last part of my drive. I have tried to figure out which rest stop this was and can't ID it, but it was a gas station with a large mini-mart. Opposite the gas station was the on-ramp back to I-78 West, and parallel to the on-ramp was a dirt road, which comes into play later. I was heading into the store when a man in his late 30s, early 40s approached me. He was a stocky guy, definitely tall, I'm 5'1", and had on a plain black tee and jeans, with dark brown hair and a mustache/goatee. He had come out of a black pickup truck parked a few spaces away from my car. He had a super intense gaze and immediately creeped me out. He just had a crazy energy about him. I didn't really get vibes from people that often, but this was so strange. He stood too close. His gaze was crazy direct or focused, and his word choices were strange. It immediately set off all my alarms. He asked if I was from the area, despite my Connecticut license plate, where I was headed, and if I knew of anything fun to do because he had plans later and time to kill beforehand. He invited me to go play mini-golf or watch a movie with him. I didn't answer any of his questions, declined his invitation to hang out, and told him I didn't know the area, and walked away toward the store. I was blown away that he had asked me to go anywhere with him. It was so random and uncomfortable. As I was walking away, he actually screamed out, "You're gorgeous," and the volume and tone made my hair stand on end. It was super aggressive and inappropriate, and he even startled a family who was walking out of the store because it was so loud. I didn't turn around, but went inside. He came into the store shortly after, and was staring at me, so I went to use the bathroom and stayed in for at least 10 minutes texting my friend about this creep. When I came out, he wasn't in the store anymore, so I took my time buying drinks and snacks, and went out to gas my car up. I was relieved that his car was gone, and started thinking about the rest of my drive, and again getting excited to see my friend. When I pull up the road to get back onto the highway, I hear someone persistently honking his horn, and see this creep show on the dirt road parallel to the on-ramp in his truck honking, shouting, and waving at me to drive over in his direction. He was directly facing the gas station and had been waiting for me. I immediately freaked out and jumped on the on-ramp back to I-78. He pulled out onto the highway after me, and I called my friend, extremely scared. I drove so fast, and probably dangerously, and looking back, I'm lucky that I didn't either get into an accident or pulled over, but I didn't know what else to do. He didn't follow me for that long, and I think after a few exits, he pulled off. My friend and I had a backup plan that if I saw his car again, she would direct me to a police station the next town over from her house instead of my going directly there, and leading some freak to us. I didn't see the car again and continued on my journey, but the last few hours of my drive I was extremely tense and anxious. I remember checking my mirrors regularly for this black pickup truck. It all ended well. I got to my friend's house safely, and we had a lovely weekend. The encounter was definitely creepy, but over the years I didn't put much thought into it. A few years ago, in 2014, I was talking with another friend who is big into serial killers, and mentioned my encounter jokingly, suggesting that this was a serial killer I had met, and told her my experience. She was fascinated, and wanted to Google active serial killers in the Pennsylvania area at the time. The first hit was for Adam Leroy Lane, and he looked almost exactly like the man that I had met back in 2006. Obviously, it could be my mind filling in the blanks, but the basic characteristics, 40, tall but stocky, brown hair with a mustache, goatee, and the time and area, all match. In my memory, he was a little bit slimmer than the pictures, and it was 2006, not 2007, when he was actually convicted of murdering women. Still, it's an odd coincidence, and one I have definitely never forgotten. I have these dreams sometimes. Sometimes they're warnings, and other times they're just odd. I started noticing that they weren't normal when I was about 8, and I started having the same dream every night. My parents were freshly divorced, and my mom had moved into this yellow house. The heater didn't work, and every window was broken. She wouldn't allow us near the windows because she was afraid we'd get cut. This house was mostly normal during the day. The buzz of the fan above the stove while Mom cooks, me and my sister playing, the TV on, just seemed normal. But every night, that dream would come back. It wasn't a bad dream, just one that I really don't get. A native man, who looked like he was probably a chief based on the headdress, would walk into the house through the front door. He would look at me for a long time before opening every cabinet and drawer, and then would exit through the back door. I had this dream for a week or two before telling my mom. But I went to her one day and I said, every night I have a dream that someone opens all the drawers, cabinets, and doors, and it's really starting to creep me out. She looked at me and told me that she had woke up and had to shut every door and cabinet and drawer that morning. Then, when I was about 10, my uncle was hospitalized. All of our family was staying together in one house so that we could all help each other out. Our uncle was a big part of our lives and really kept the family together. The adults went to visit him, and all us kids stayed home with one adult who stayed behind. When they came back, they told us very little about my uncle's condition. They just said he can't wait to be back home. That night, I dreamt that I went alone to find out what had really happened. I walked into the hospital room where my uncle was and I said, "Hey uncle, it's me, your niece. How are you?" And he said, "Who are you? I don't have any family. I don't remember them." I spent the rest of the dream trying to convince him that I was real. It smelled like hand sanitizer and old people. I woke up crying and screaming. I don't know why, but I knew it wasn't just a dream. So I asked my mom and aunt, "Why did you lie to me? Uncle doesn't even remember us." They asked me how I knew. I dreamt another time that my mom was wearing all red. She was so confident and pretty, and I remember telling her in the dream that she looked really nice. And then her boyfriend came out. He started fighting with her, asking why she was wearing that slutty color. "Are you cheating on me? You know I'll kill you if you do, right? Now you know what? I don't want to be with a woman that dresses like that. Have fun being single." I woke back up, and she was wearing all red. I begged her to change. I said, "Mom, something bad is going to happen," because I remembered how much she loved him, even if I hated him. She didn't listen, and a few minutes later I was hearing, "Are you cheating on me? You know I'll kill you if you do, right?" All over again. Things like this stopped for a while. Everything was peaceful, and I didn't read into dreams too much. Until last year, anyway. Last year I had a strange dream that my current boyfriend was in. At the time of this dream, we were only acquaintances. We had just barely met. The dream was unlike any of the others, because I wasn't all the way asleep while I was having it, and I found that I could not move. Other things happened too, but I'll get into that later. The dream starts with me walking to the bathroom because I had to pee. Then I make the decision to leave the bathroom door open because no one is home. I have the quick thought to myself, "Don't leave that door open," but I ignore it. It's gotten to the point where it's time for me to clean up and wash my hands. But when I look out the door as I'm about to get up, I see my current boyfriend. His head is tilted to the side, and he's saying, "She's here." He says it very creepily and matter-of-fact-like, but it doesn't sound like him at all. He continues and repeats himself. I say, "Who? Who is here?" But when I engage in the conversation he's trying to have, what he says changes. He starts saying, "Her heart is here." At that point, across the hall from the bathroom, my bedroom door swings open to show me a little girl. But she's not a little girl at all. She took my voice. I tried calling out for everyone. My dad, my sister, the neighbors. Nothing would come out until I called for my mother. But calling for my mother was useless. She lived an hour and a half away. I woke up calling for her. I figured it was a sign to visit, but we weren't on the best terms. Anyway, around the time Halloween was supposed to be celebrated, my cats started acting really weird in my room. I started feeling uncomfortable staying in there. I couldn't breathe in there after that dream. My cats would scratch at the walls, and sometimes would hiss at my closet for no reason. On Halloween night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the dreams I was gonna have, so I took NyQuil and passed out in a record 17 minutes. I figured I'd be asleep all through the night, but I woke up at 3 a.m. I saw someone standing next to my closet. It looked like my mom, but I wasn't sure. I shut my eyes and refused to open them because I was terrified. When I woke up, without telling my mom anything about what had happened, I asked her what she had dreamt of. And she told me, "I dreamt I was standing next to your closet. Something's not right about that closet. Maybe you should come visit for a while and give yourself some space from there." I want to make it very clear, I never told her anything about this closet. I didn't tell her that I saw her when she dreamt she was there. I didn't tell her about the girl. I didn't tell her about the cats. So I came to visit after about a month, around Thanksgiving. I had been sleeping in Dad's living room or going to friends to avoid my bedroom. I couldn't wait to sleep in a bed. Everything at Mom's was wonderful. We had movie night, talked about things, and just got caught up. So when I came back to Dad's, I actually hadn't slept. I was so happy to be at Mom's, I had just stayed up the whole time. So when I got back, I was pretty exhausted. I went to my room because I was feeling better about it. I turned on my nightlight, still terrified of the dark, and opened my bedroom door. I will die in a fire before I shut that door when I'm inside the room, and laid down to go to sleep. Instantly, the dream took me, before I was even all the way gone. I felt someone hug me and start to kiss my neck. It felt like someone I knew, and I wasn't bothered by it. But the second I relaxed into the hug, it got tighter and tighter until I couldn't breathe. I realized my nightlight wasn't on anymore, and the faint glow from the hallway wasn't much. But it was enough for me to see the closet door open and these odd creatures come out. Short, undefined. Any lines that defined them were just white lines on their shadowy bodies. I felt that they were going to hurt me, and again I was terrified, but I just woke up, and then it was over. I looked over though, and I realized that my closet door was still open, and my nightlight was off, even though I had shut that door and turned the light on beforehand. This happened some time ago. I'm now a 23-year-old female, but I was around 14 or 15 when this occurred in a sizable city in the UK. Even now as a young adult, I am very tiny, standing at 4'9". As a 14-year-old, I was roughly this height, if not a bit smaller. I used to adore going to my local library, and I still do today. But back then, I used to go all the time, quite a few times a week, especially during the holidays. My local library had a large amount of computers that were accessible to those holding a membership, including myself, and at that age, we did not have the internet at home, as my mother encouraged us to use the libraries instead. As a kid, I hated it, but now I think it was a really good idea on her part. Anyway, on this particular day, I was on the computer finishing some homework and checking Facebook. It was very quiet, and I had around an hour to go of my online session when an older man sat down to log into the computer next to mine. I took no notice, but out of the corner of my eye, I began to see that he was looking at me. He stood out by a mile, dressed in a white suit with a white hat. No one in my city dressed like that, especially in the middle of summer. One thing to consider. I looked very young, probably younger than my 14 years, but I had developed quite a lot that summer. Outwards more than upwards, unfortunately for me, and my slightly too small t-shirt and jeans were probably what drew him to look at me. Creep. As a friendly kid, I looked over at him and smiled one of those tight-lipped smiles of acknowledgement. I was beginning to get uncomfortable, but I knew if he said or did something, the staff, who knew me very well, would intervene. However, he didn't say anything. He simply kept glancing over in my direction. Eventually, he logged out of his computer and began writing on a notepad. He then ripped off a piece of paper and slipped it to me, now very obviously staring at me. I didn't respond. I didn't even look at the paper. I knew he had written his phone number. He stood up and began walking to the stairs to exit the floor, occasionally turning around to stare a bit longer. Some of the people on the computers opposite me had noticed and were watching me sympathetically. I can't remember exactly how long the exchange took. I've described it fairly quickly, but he could have been staring at me for nearly half an hour. As he disappeared from sight, I grabbed the piece of paper, ripped it up, and threw it in the nearby bin. I felt quite proud of myself. I could deal with creeps. Younger me was a bit big-headed. I never saw him in the library after that. There was a library closer to my house that I frequented more often during that summer, so whether or not he turned up at the city library again to look for me, I don't know. That wasn't the last time I saw him, though. A few months later, I was on the bus, although I can't remember where I was going, and he stepped on. Still in his white suit, white hat, the works. I stiffened and stared out of the window, hoping he wouldn't notice me. He did, and he stared, but he walked past me. When I got off the bus, I kept my eyes fixed on the street, making sure not to look at the bus in case I looked at him. After that, I didn't see him anywhere again. I regret not keeping that piece of paper. In hindsight, I should have. It was definitely his number, although he could have also written his name. He was clearly a predator and should have been reported. I don't know why I didn't, and I don't know why I didn't tell anyone, although I guess that was because nothing bad had happened. I lived in my hometown for another 6 years before going to university in another city. However, university has now ended for me, and I've returned home wary of creeps. I know this wasn't very scary. I've had other small creep stories, all based in the same city, funnily enough, and they're not scary per se, just uncomfortable. So, man in white, let's not meet again. I was around 12 years old, and me and my friend were in the mountains. I can't recall the name of the village, but it was situated in the Czech Republic. We were on a hike and stumbled upon an old military station or bunker, just left there after World War II. We went home for flashlights and came back just before the sun was out. We went inside and found that it had like 2 or 3 floors underground, maybe more, with a 40-meter well full of frozen water on the ground floor. We decided to go down and explore. First floor, there was nothing unusual, just some empty concrete spaces. We went another floor down, and I saw some things on the ground that looked like dead rats from a distance. I laughed it off and went to take a closer look. They were bats, about 10 of them, just lying down, dead. They weren't like violently smashed or anything. There was no blood. It was as if they were just sleeping, not even rotten or decaying. I poked one with my foot, and the thing just rolled over. I started to get a little scared, but eager to explore further. My friend was basically halfway up the stairs at this point, nervous laughing, saying, "Yeah, we should really go, I have a bad feeling," or something like that. I was almost pulled to continue exploring. Half of me knew that it didn't feel right, but I ignored my friend and continued on. I was almost there, and I suddenly got sick in my gut. That feeling that's screaming in you, the adrenaline. I took another couple of stairs, shining with my flashlight ahead, and then I saw it. I scanned the whole floor, seeing the stairs that went even further below collapsed, so no getting further down. And as I looked across the room with my flashlight, there was a spot that it could not illuminate. In the middle of that spot, there stood the shadow of a man. The flashlight's beam just couldn't get through the form of it. It ate all of the light. I then realized how cold that it had become. I could see my breath. I was staring, paralyzed, for what seems like minutes, but was probably only a couple of seconds. The shadow got a little closer as I blinked. No need to say, I bolted like I never did before, not even caring if it was behind me or what it was. Just running for my life. I got to the entrance and my friend was looking at me horrified, and I just told him to run while rushing past him. We sprinted for about 5 minutes, then confirmed that yes, we were still alive. When we got home, he told me that he had seen something in the corner as I ran past him, so it wasn't just me. His father told us the next day that a lot of soldiers had died there, and there's even an army museum nearby. So was it the ghost of a soldier or a shadow person? So my boyfriend recently moved to the city and got this room in this student building. To explain, we have 3 different levels, and each level is the same. It has 4 individual doors with individual locks. Each door is a separate room that you can rent. So you share shower, toilet, kitchen, but overall it's kind of like having your own place. More like an apartment than a house. He lives on the 3rd floor, and we recently bought a cabinet for his place. So as we were lifting the cabinet through the front door, the guy also comes into the building with us. We politely let him pass because lifting the thing upstairs is going to take a lot of time. I smile at him and say hello, and then see his face. Legit, then, all my stranger danger alarms start going off. He had this weird smile, like a satisfied, smug kind of grin. He towered over me, and I saw his dirty mustache that barely even was a mustache. That kind of thing 14-year-olds grow. Nothing really is there yet, just here and there are some hairs. Also, his hair looked greasy, and he just looked dirty. I noticed he went to the 2nd floor, lucky for us. Once we get to the stairs, we both agree that he creeped us out, but we try not to judge and just let it go. Like a week or so later, we have a dog over. We go and walk him in the evening, and it was still light outside at this time. As we start to walk back to the building, we spot the creepy guy, and have to pass him because of the way he was walking. It was like he was moving in slow motion, not a care in the world, and again, with that satisfied, smug grin on his face. But that's not what creeped us out. Looking at his face, we realized that there was no way he was sober. He looked so out of this world, very noticeably on drugs. In that moment, the way he walked and the way he looked, I just got really wrong vibes from him. I did not want to be close to him at all, and again my stranger danger alarms were going off. This happened near the city center. My boyfriend and I decide not to walk back with him to the building, so we take another route just to avoid him. And we take our time to make sure that he's in his room before we enter the building. This is the creepiest part. I'll have to give you some background information. 3 weeks before our first encounter with this guy, someone randomly got murdered while he was jogging near the school campus. Stabbed. Died instantly. The suspect had been seen at the time near the campus, and so a drawing of said suspect had been released. But they didn't have him, and didn't really have anything else to work with. Now, just today, my boyfriend and I got back from his work at like 4 in the afternoon, when we noticed someone in a suit standing outside. Didn't really think much of it. Later that night, the guy who lives next door catches me as I just got back from the bathroom, and asks me if we already have a key to the front door. I say, yeah, we do, why? He said that the police had to break the door down, so he was in charge of getting everyone new keys. My boyfriend at this time joins us with the person who lives on the other side of us. I ask what happened. Apparently, the guy who killed the person near the campus lived on the 2nd floor. Legit, my hairs start standing up straight when I hear those words. I ask if he could have been seen, or how he looked. He told me he was tall, black hair with a weird mustache, and looks kind of dirty. It was the very same creepy dude. My boyfriend and I are still in utter shock that we lived so close to this murderer, someone who had walked around near the city center and cooked his dinner in the shared kitchen while he took someone's life. Someone that I had smiled to, said hello, and tried to avoid. So creepy murderer living in the same building, let's not meet again. About 2 years ago, my Nana brought home a Ouija board that she found at a yard sale. I have always been a true believer in the paranormal, and it's always been one of my peak interests. I have heard or read enough stories and watched enough shows to know not to mess around with a Ouija board, and quite frankly, they kind of freaked me out, so I wanted nothing to do with it. My Nana, on the other hand, doesn't believe in the paranormal whatsoever, and thought it would just be a fun game for myself, my brother, and the oldest of my 2 cousins. I left it on the dining room table for days before she made me put it away. I ended up sliding it under my bed in hopes of just forgetting about it. My brother, 11, and my cousin, 12, bugged me about it constantly because they wanted to play with it and I wouldn't let them. I tried to explain to them that it wasn't just a game, and that it shouldn't be messed with, but they were preteen boys who couldn't help but do things that they shouldn't. One day after I got home from work, the boys were there and I had this sneaking suspicion that they played with it. I looked under my bed and it was there, but I just had this odd feeling. That's when I went downstairs and interrogated them about it. At first, of course, they denied it, but I saw right through them until they finally admitted that they had in fact played with the board. I asked them if they had said goodbye when they were done, and they claimed that they did. My cousin likes to over-exaggerate stories big time, and makes things up to be overly dramatic, so when he told me about a couple of things that supposedly happened, I didn't believe him at all. Also, they were boys who liked to mess with each other, so I assumed that's what was occurring. Anyways, a couple of nights later I got in bed, and as I lay there trying to fall asleep, I got this feeling like I was being watched. I looked over at my closet, which has 2 sliding doors, and I noticed one of the doors is slightly opened, leaving a small space. It creeped me out for some reason, so I turned and faced the other way, trying to ignore everything and just fall asleep. I finally passed out, and the next thing I know, I'm woken up by what felt like someone or something hitting me in the back of the head. I was lying on my back, so the back of my head was fully on my pillow, which made it even weirder. And it wasn't a light hit, either. It scared me so bad. I was shaking. I look around my room and I don't see anything, but then all of a sudden I hear my floor creaking like someone is walking around my bed. After laying there for a good little while, I finally got the courage to get up and grab my phone and book it to my living room. I sat and tried to calm down. I could still feel a tingling, pulsating sensation at the back of my head. I turned on my phone and realized it was 3 in the morning. I called my boyfriend, now husband, with tears streaming down my face from being so freaked out. He didn't pick up, and I swear I called him another 15 to 20 times before I finally gave up. I sat in the chair until my Nana got up around 6. I didn't tell her what had happened, because I knew she wouldn't believe me and would say I was acting stupid. After she got up, I had breakfast and then called my boyfriend again, and he finally answered. He told me he had his phone on silent mode so that he didn't know that I had been calling. I gave him so much crap for this, let me tell you. I told him what had happened and he felt so bad and felt like an idiot. He told me he would have come over in a heartbeat to comfort me and was so apologetic. Later that day, he came over and we took the Ouija board to a junkyard to get rid of it. My husband is the only one in my family that knows what happened, and I didn't experience anything again after I got rid of the Ouija board. So once again, moral of the story, Ouija boards should not be messed with. So, I've always had hyper-realistic dreams. I also have always believed that my dreams are how God talks to me. I know that sounds a little crazy. Regardless, the other night I had a dream that I believe is a sign. I also should say that my walk in faith has been wavering in the past year, and I've also been going to see psychics a few times a year since last December. Anyway, to the dream. I believe I was on a road trip with a couple of my buddies. We stopped at a little diner in a small town that had a psychic, gimmicky store attached to it. I was waiting for my friends to use the bathroom, and when they both came out, they both said that they wanted to go and do a reading. I said all right, and that I would wait for them to be done. They went through this black-lit corridor through a purple-curtained doorway. They came back out not too long after, all smiling and cheerful. They told me that I should do a reading, but something didn't feel right. I've always been sensitive to energies in general, but there was something about this place. They kept tugging me when all of a sudden the psychic came out. Immediately, all the alarms were going off in my head. She came up to me and got really close to my face. She had these bulging eyes, and her face was full of super white makeup, really heavy eyeshadow and eyeliner. Her hair was a fire truck red, and slicked back into a bun with feathers and things sticking up. She was really freaking me out, but I was like, alright, whatever, so we start. She grabs me by the shoulders, and we make very intense eye contact, and she starts telling me a bunch of things like I have the gift, something that I already know. And we start backing away almost like a dance, and then we both get on all fours and drop down on our bellies, and she starts to slither toward me. Literally, slithering, without using her hands. This is when I know something is actually really up. I stop everything. I stand up, and am telling her that I'm done. She is still slithering toward me. She then slithers all the way up my body until her face meets mine. Then she says, "Let me show you the way." I say no. This makes her super angry, and she picks me up by my throat and keeps chanting, "Let me show you the way, let me show you the way." She starts running with me in her hand, and the room keeps elongating, so she keeps running. Then snakes start coming out of her sides, and they burrow into my skin. I feel the pain of them digging into me and biting me. I'm grabbing onto her wrists, and I scream, "No! There is only one way. God is the way." And I scream this while making eye contact, and she starts screaming bloody murder. And I get the strength to gouge out her eyes with my thumbs. More snakes and spiders begin pouring from her eye sockets, and I scream that again, that God is the way. And that's when I woke up. I would like to preface by saying that I am a Roman Catholic who has experienced paranormal phenomena since I was 5. My late grandmother had experienced similar phenomena, and my mother and sisters also, but to a much lesser degree. As I get older, I notice the experiences are slightly more darker in nature. I know very little of demonology, other than what has been referenced in the Bible. I try to stay away from anything referencing demons, the devil, etc., which is why this experience was so difficult, and I was not prepared. In October of 2018, I was admitted to the hospital due to an electrolyte imbalance. I was in a room with 3 other female patients. On my second night, my arms were finally free of the IV, so I was able to move around and assist the other women, who weren't as mobile, in getting ready for bed. One of the women was much older and cranky. She seemed to take an instant dislike to me when I first moved into the room, but warmed up to me after I helped her. When the lights went out, I decided to lay on my stomach and say my silent prayers. To the casual observer, it would have looked as if I was asleep. During this time, I could hear the woman that I helped argue with herself about me. She stated that I was nice, and then she replied to herself stating that I am not what I seem or something to that effect, and it went back and forth like that during my prayers. Shortly after, the room started getting really cold, really fast. I silently prayed to God to watch over her and free her from any negative influences. It was then that I heard her say these words very loudly. "I don't know the Lord's Prayer, and my name." I freaked out, quickly processing what had just happened. The woman knew that I was praying over her, and there was no way that she could have known that. In my mind, I instinctively knew that I was not up for the confrontation. I was weak and still recovering. I got up from my bed, and with my back to her, I said something like, "There's no way I can stay here now." To which she answered, "Yes, go. I won," and laughed really hard. I was amazed that the other two women had slept through it. It was around 10 p.m. when this occurred. The room was stiflingly cold at this point, and I ran to reception and asked to be discharged, but the charge nurse said that I couldn't leave without my doctor discharging me. I begged again to be discharged, but was denied, and the nurses tried to calm me as they got a hold of my doctor, who said that he would be in at 7 a.m. and that I needed to stay put. I asked to be relocated to another room in the interim, but the only available room was directly next door, and that was way too close for my liking, so they put me in the day room with a blanket and pillow. I used my phone to call my sister to get me out of the hospital. She works at another hospital, and told me the car wasn't home and to catch an Uber to her place. The ward was locked down for the evening though, so I couldn't leave anyway, and chose to just stay in the day room. The TV was on standby, but I could hear voices coming from it, even though the screen was blank. The voices talked about a shooting at the hospital I was in, with thousands of fatalities. It then talked about my baby nephew being in a plane that was shot down. By then, I was truly hysterical, as fear for my family took root and everything I learned went out the window. Throughout this time, the voices from the TV continued, calling me names, etc. I couldn't stay any longer in the day room, and the nurses had me on a stretcher right in front of the main desk, where the charge nurse could see me. It felt like a really bad dream, and I was hysterical and paranoid. I laid down on the stretcher, and that's when I noticed hanging overhead the ward number 66. I was also on the 6th floor of the hospital. I wondered if that was why there was so much activity there. Not long after, I started hearing other voices coming from different rooms of the ward asking about me. They seemed to be communicating to each other and laughing. I started silently praying again with more conviction. A male patient in the ward nearest my stretcher started crying out for help, claiming that I was hurting him. I prayed even harder, citing the Lord's Prayer. He asked the nurse for the name of the lady outside hurting him, and she gave him my first name. He started crying again, joined by another voice 2 doors down. I prayed to know who they were in Jesus' name, and all these voices talked at once, but the one name that I could clearly make out was Beelzebub. I continued to pray throughout the first night as they taunted, laughed, cackled, and cried. At this point, the light in the man's hospital room was turned on as a nurse was with him trying to calm him down. I had been sitting up on my stretcher bed whilst praying, and watched his silhouette as he tried to inch his way to the open doorway. It was then that I noticed the odd shadow that he cast. It was so strange. It looked like a spiky-headed being with a dog. Spiky-headed in an almost cartoonish way like Bart Simpson. It continued until morning, and I was moved to a small private room awaiting the doctor. The voices were still verbally attacking and threatening me, but my hysteria was long gone by that point, and I was just determined to leave. I ended up discharging myself before the doctor arrived, but had to return as I still had the IV catheter in my arm. On my return, they placed me in another ward. I refused to go back to Ward 66, and I was allowed to recover in peace. And eventually, the demonic taunting stopped. I had a course of bad luck following that event. Basically, all of 2019 was a series of misfortunes and bad luck that still hasn't come right. I don't know what to do other than just keep moving on. I went to a psychiatrist last December who said that other than the trauma I would need their help with, I was in good mental health. All this started when I was in middle school. I was young and stupid and seriously interested in the paranormal. I grew up in a religious home, and I am still religious. I have no explanation for what happened to me. I started experimenting with the paranormal with my friends. We thought it would be really cool to use a Ouija board. At first, nothing seemed to happen, but then the board started to move. We asked all the normal stupid questions like, "Who's there?" or "Is anyone here?" It moved really slow and steady. I was sure that my friend was messing with me. I got spooked and we threw out the board. But that is not where this story ends. Moving forward, I started having really weird nightmares. I would consistently wake up at 3 a.m. or not be able to sleep at all. I was basically a zombie throughout my entire day. There was one time when I was at home alone on FaceTime when I heard my mom yell my name. I yelled back and didn't get a response. My friend then reminded me that I was home alone. I immediately checked my whole house and no one was there. She heard the voice too, though, so it couldn't be explained. I continued hearing voices and knocks and was still unable to sleep. There was one time where I was in my room doing homework and someone pulled my hair so hard that my head actually yanked down. I got so spooked that I ran to my dad and told him what had happened. He obviously didn't really believe me. My brother started noticing weird things too, and that's when I got really uncomfortable. He and I were in my room, and I went to the bathroom. When I came out, his face was stone white. He claimed he saw a little girl run past my bedroom door. It couldn't have been me because I used the bathroom connected to my room. We don't have any other siblings. Another time, I was on FaceTime again with a separate friend, and I had my phone out in front of me when I walked into my bathroom. My friend asked, "What is that behind you?" And as soon as she said that, the lights shut off. I sprinted to my brother's room, and of course, nobody believed me again. The icing on the cake, though, was when I was asleep one night and I woke up suddenly. It was 3 a.m. again, and I was completely paralyzed with fear. I couldn't move. All I could see was a hooded figure in all black staring at me from the corner of my room. I couldn't see its eyes. I just knew that it was looking at me. It began to float toward me and then pressed all of its weight on my chest. I couldn't talk or move. After silently crying for what felt like forever, I finally croaked out the word Jesus, and it fled from the room through my door. After that incident, I told my mom everything about the Ouija board and the experiences, and she finally believed me. She could see how scared that I truly was and knew that I couldn't be lying. She immediately got to work and blessed me and the house. I haven't had anything that terrifying happen to me since, and I no longer live in that home. This is my mom and dad's story. It was their honeymoon. They married in August of 1980 in Australia, and they were driving along the Bruce Highway into a city called Rockhampton, Queensland. It was late at night, 8 p.m.-ish, and they had been driving most of the day. There is a very long stretch of road before you come into the city that's just bush, kilometers of it. At night, the bush can be very scary. They had not passed cars for some time, probably a couple of hours. Out of nowhere, headlights appeared a long way behind them in their rearview mirror. That was fine, whatever. They keep driving as normal. Then, the headlights start getting closer and closer. My dad is driving and says something like, "What a bloody turkey. Look at how fast he's going." The car comes right up to them with their high beams on and follows them for about 5 minutes like that. Mom and Dad have a conversation about why can't the person just overtake them. Then, the car completely backs off. Like slows right down, almost to a complete stop, and hangs back about 1 to 2 kilometers away for a good 15 minutes. Mom and Dad both think that is super weird and creepy, but again, whatever. They just keep going. Then the car speeds up again, tailgating high beam and sort of swerving into the other lane as if to get to overtake them, but he never did. This goes on for another 5-ish minutes. Mom and Dad are both really scared now. Remember, this is the days before mobiles or cell phones, and besides, there would have been no reception in that area to call for help, even if they had them, and it's not over yet. The car backs off again, but not as far as before, and then hangs back there for about a minute before hitting the gas and absolutely flying past Mom and Dad and finally passing them. There appeared to be only one person in the car, but they couldn't really see what that person looked like. There was also no number plate on the car to identify it. And I know my dad has told me heaps of times before, but I can't actually remember what sort of car it was now. I feel like it was sort of a sedan type of thing. Definitely white. The car disappears up the road, as if it were never there. Mom and Dad were shaken to their core, but pleased that it was seemingly over. But no, it's still not done yet. The road now becomes a bit more windy, whereas previously it had almost been straight. Mom and Dad come around a corner and the car is parked in the middle of the road, facing them, again with high beams on, both driver and passenger doors wide open, and the man, they could now see that it was a man, standing in front of the car with his arms spread wide. Spread as if to make them stop. Mom was screaming at Dad, "Just hit him, don't stop, just hit him." And my dad, being the bloody hero that he is, did not stop and drove around the man's car on the right-hand side of it, which would be the passenger side as it was parked facing them. The man tried to get in front of Dad, I assumed to stop him from driving off, as he made this maneuver, but he couldn't quite get there in time. He was very close to the car and Dad nearly hit him. Dad absolutely floored it. He said he was doing around 130, 140 kilometers per hour to get away from that man. They aren't sure how long they drove like that, but they didn't slow back down to the speed limit until they started to come into the city limits. They made it to their hotel and parked the car at the back of the hotel so that you couldn't see it from the road, because it was on the side of the highway and passing traffic could see the cars parked there. Mom was quite hysterical and told reception what had happened. They called the police and reported it, but they never found the car or the driver. Fast forward to many years later and Mom was watching the news and Ivan Milat had just been arrested. Mom screamed and called Dad into the lounge room. They both agreed that he was in fact the man that they saw. They were absolutely adamant. I can't find evidence to suggest that Ivan Milat was active in Queensland during that time, but I certainly won't call Mom and Dad liars because of what they saw. I imagine it was another creepy hillbilly who looked very similar to Mr. Backpacker Murderer. This happened a few years ago while I was still in college. My best friend of many years is back in town, so we decided to get together and we stayed out fairly late, but hey, we're college kids, nighttime is our thing. My friend is very, very Catholic, and she decided to drive us this night. Mind you, neither of us was doing any drinking. After many shenanigans and lots of catching up, it was time to go home. It was probably around 2, 3 a.m. Still not exhausted, but she definitely was. Well, I'm staring at her dash where one of her many Catholic baubles were in the car when we get to the last light before she drops me at my house. I look out the window, as one does, and was met with the person in the car next to us staring into the car, and I kid you not, I screamed. The guy had gray skin, black eyes with no white, and a smile that was too long with sharpened teeth. He didn't break eye contact with me, and I was freaking out. My friend was completely oblivious until I said her name. She somehow didn't hear me scream. I, as calmly as possible, told her to look at the guy in the car next to us, and then she silently screamed too, and then proceeded to freak out and gunned it out of the intersection. Once again, this was 3 a.m., the light was still red, and she was not having this. She sped to my house and had me watching behind the car to make sure that we weren't being followed, whilst praying aloud, something she never does as she knows that I'm not religious. A few very short moments later, she pulls up in front of my house. She also put her high beams on as I walked to my door because she was, again, not about this. After I was safely inside, she called my cell and had me on the phone until she made it to her house all of 3 minutes later. We were both really shaken up about it the next day, but we never talked about it again. Anytime I've tried to bring it up, she shudders and changes the topic immediately. She did tell me she went to be blessed the next day, on a random Tuesday. I can still feel the soul-shaking sensation of looking that guy in the eyes. I'm not saying it couldn't have been some dude dressed up in a costume or something, but it shook both of us to our core. It was a Monday night, at around 3 a.m, and I honestly don't feel like this was a normal human occurrence. My grandparents died about 10 years ago. They both died peacefully of old age and left an old house in a countryside. That house has a lot of great memories. My best Christmas and birthdays. Despite that, recently I've started having nightmares that would always have the house in them. Sometimes someone's chasing me, other times there are ghosts. It's always basically a horror movie scenario. Being religious, I thought it was about time to visit my grandparents' graves and light a candle. It's about a 3-hour drive, so I decided to visit them and crash at their house for the night. Well, I'm never doing that again. It was still bright outside when I arrived. I went inside to open the windows and clean up a bit. That's when I heard a weird sound. It was as if someone was walking in the room, but no one was there except me. I was spooked, but I convinced myself that there must be rats or other creatures in the attic. I managed to stay calm and rational, and spent the rest of the evening watching YouTube in bed. That's when the fun started. The internet connection is terrible there. You kinda have to walk around the room to catch 4G like some sort of Wi-Fi. Like many times before, my internet lagged, and I ended up sitting in silence. This is when I heard it, loud and clear. There was someone in the kitchen, and they turned on the light switch. I was sure it was that switch, because whenever you turn on the light in the kitchen, it made this loud click sound. I literally froze. I was in the middle of nowhere, and I was about to be killed by some maniac. All the knives were in the kitchen too, and I only had pepper spray in my bag. Then the intruder started walking, slow steps as if they were just wandering around. I thought I will die from fear, and I didn't know for how long that I was frozen, but it really did feel like forever. I was literally waiting to be killed. I don't know how much more time passed, but it was long enough that my muscles started spasming from being so intense and not moving. I gathered all courage, hoping that the intruder had left, and somehow managed to go to the kitchen. The light was on as expected, but the person had already left. I ran to the door, expecting to see it wide open, but to my surprise, it was shut down and locked, as I had left it. There was no sign of entry. I'm never going back alone. This happened earlier last week at my sister's house. She lives about 5 minutes from me and has a 1-year-old baby girl who, when she goes to sleep, has a baby monitor in her room to make sure that everything is okay. Anyway, my sister had just finished putting my niece to sleep and I was watching her on the baby monitor. Nothing crazy, and it was during the middle of the week around 7:30 p.m. Well, my sister comes downstairs and we make some small talk while I'm on my phone. Then I randomly decide to check the baby monitor, where there is a clear view of a rocking chair in place about 3 feet away from the crib. I saw myself sitting there, wearing a t-shirt and shorts, looking down at my phone in the rocking chair. I was absolutely horrified, and I screamed to my sister about it, and it scared the crap out of her. I had never seen anything like it in my life, and I didn't know how to react. When I looked up and she came rushing over to check the monitor, I was gone. Nothing. Just my niece sleeping in her crib in the dark. The rocking chair, totally empty. Obviously, we had to go and check on her, and I was terrified, and my sister had a bat, but no one was there but her. Nothing was out of place. I wasn't wearing what I had on that night, though. I was clearly wearing a white t-shirt and gym shorts with Nikes on. I had my glasses on, and you could see the bright cell phone screen in the dark as I hunched over to look at it. I never looked at the camera, but could tell that it was me, and I have not been able to sleep much since then. I can't get that picture out of my head, and the baby monitor doesn't record video, or else I would have gone back and looked. It's probably the craziest thing to ever happen to me in my life. I was not high, or drunk, or anything like that. It was a normal weekday after work. This story happened around 4 years ago when I was 15 years old and we had just moved into this house. We live in a very small tourist town. It's cool K through 12 in one building, population of 700, not during tourist season kind of small. There was this weird druggie that everyone knew and hated. He lived in one of his parents' houses and didn't pay rent, so they decided to kick him out. My parents were friends with the family and helped take care of his kids when he couldn't, so we were on pretty good terms. They gave the druggie, I'll just call him D for short, 30 days to move out for failing to pay a single rent check in his miserable life. We weren't doing very well at all financially and needed somewhere to stay or rent. We began talking to D's parents about the house, and they said we could begin renting to buy as soon as he moved out. The 30-day mark came around, and we asked D if he was ready, and he acted like he knew nothing about what we were talking about. His parents said they were just going to give him some extra days and help him move his stuff, so we waited another month. At this point, the current place we were staying in we had to move out of in a few days. We went to the house and went inside to see all of D's stuff still there. We decided we couldn't wait, and just bagged his stuff up and told him to pick it up. Fast forward about a year. We always heard scurrying, like mice and stuff in the ceiling. But we have a ton of strange animals, like mice, snakes, lizards, chinchillas, etc. One of our 4 snakes went missing from its closed tank with the clips holding down the lid. There were no holes anywhere to be found. We didn't think anything of it, but it was a bit strange. Eventually, we started hearing louder sounds, and our dad said it was just the house settling. Stuff was disappearing from the fridge, electrical bills went up, we smelt smoke, etc. Us kids got blamed for all of it, and got our phones taken, and my PC was taken away. But the power bill was still up. I also got blamed for smoking in the house, which my parents had no reason to believe or prompt this accusation, so I was grounded until graduation. I was mad now because I did not smoke in our house. I was unbelievably bored one day not being able to do anything, so I decided to explore our attic. I opened the door and screamed. My mom then came right up the ladder ready to beat me and saw it too. A bed, microwave, mini fridge, cigarettes, unsmoked blunt, etc. Guess who? It's D. He then came back that night, through my little sister's window. He was higher than I have ever seen a person be, and admitted to a bunch of stuff that we recorded. He took the snake and let it loose to get rid of the mice. He smoked in our house. He snuck in through my little sister's room every night. In court, he then admitted to making a small hole in the floor of the attic to watch my 11-year-old sister sleep. We changed all the locks, got a Ring doorbell, placed higher security locks on all the windows, and more. And the worst part of it all? The creep only got 6 months probation for marijuana possession, which wasn't yet legal in my state at the time. He got only 1 year of prison for breaking and entering for an entire year, almost every day. He did, however, have to pay a pretty heavy fine for damages and had to pay us back a year's worth of our electric bill. We are now out of debt, and my parents are living steadily because he finally finished paying all the fines to us. My sister has to go to a therapist twice a week and might never get a good night's sleep again. When I was younger, I used to be obsessed with ghosts and all sort of haunting shows. Now, I'd never particularly had a reason to believe that my house was haunted, but one day my brother came home claiming to have found $10 out of nowhere. I'll never know for sure if he was just messing with me, but after curiosity got a hold, I asked him where he really got the money from. Stupid me assumed maybe a friend? Perhaps he stole it from my parents' wallet? My parents never claimed to have been missing any money, however, something they definitely would have voiced being distraught about had they noticed that we had taken their cash. The story he gave me was that a young girl, maybe about the age of 7, had followed him onto the school bus that afternoon. He had never met this girl before, and had never seen her around at school, but she decided to sit in the seat right in front of him. After riding the bus for a while, she started to talk to him. Nobody else could see her, according to him, and the other kids were giving him weird looks. Eventually, she handed him $10 with a note, and then subsequently got off the bus at the next stop. I immediately assumed that he was lying and laughed, of course. I asked him to show me the note, which he promptly retrieved from his room and passed me a tiny piece of paper. A shiver ran down my spine, as the note wasn't in his handwriting. It read, "I'll help you, but only this time," which I believe was in response to the fact that my brother was begging my parents for a Zelda charm bracelet for months, which they refused to buy him. Given that he had $10 now, he could just buy it himself, though. Of course, I was extremely intrigued by this, even if it sounded absurd. I suggested we make a makeshift Ouija board to see if we could contact anyone. So we wrote the alphabet on a piece of paper and grabbed a necklace to hover above the DIY board. My brother was interested too, so he decided it could be fun. Mind you, I was in 6th grade and he was in the 4th at the time, so any sort of movement from the necklace caught our attention and we immediately thought that it was a ghost. After asking a few questions, the necklace began to move and shake. Either my brother was really good at tricking me by slowly sliding the necklace across the board, or it really was something paranormal. We were able to get a name. Kate. After asking dumb things like, "Did you watch me complete the Shadow Temple in Ocarina of Time?" and getting a yes, me and my brother decided to stop for the night after starting to get creeped out. We never said goodbye before ending. Eventually, playing with the board would be a daily occurrence. We thought we'd made a friend, and truly believed that someone was talking to us. Me and my brother decided to take things a step further and try to record something. So we both got our tablets, placed them in front of our TV, and hit record. The first thing I asked was, if someone was here, move something in the room. There was nothing. Okay, well, maybe the ghost is shy? We decided to repeat the same question, but this time we said that we would leave the room and give it a minute. We went downstairs for 5 minutes, and when we got back up, our tablets had both fallen to the floor and stopped recording. Coincidence? I mean, things fall, especially when you're not careful at placing them. So we brushed it off. In December of 6th grade, though, things got really weird. I had started hearing voices in my head, claiming that they were the ghost I was talking to while playing the Ouija board. I got so scared one night that I had grabbed the Bible that one of my religious friends had gifted me, and would sleep with it. Eventually, I told my mom that there was a ghost telling me scary things. I won't get into detail, as some of it was a little graphic. She and my dad argued for a while about whether or not I was schizophrenic, and if I should see a therapist. So, out of fear, I never told them that I was hearing voices again, but I would space out often, talking and having conversations with this thing that I believed to be a ghost. Eventually, I forgot about the ghost, and we no longer talked. I will never know what that voice was, if I was genuinely insane, or if they were just intrusive thoughts. I was just glad for it finally to have stopped. Nothing necessarily paranormal has happened to me since, besides my TV turning on randomly in the middle of the night or feeling that someone was pushing my legs with some sort of unknown force every once in a while. I sum it up to just be my imagination playing tricks on me now, but I do still have this looming feeling that ever since I've played with that Ouija board, I have some sort of spirit attached to me, following me. Not a bad one, but just a constant presence. I believe in the paranormal, but I'm skeptical about most of the stories that people tell. It's extremely hard to distinguish between a fabricated story and a true story when you can't see facial expressions or hear changes in a person's voice. About a week ago, I was sitting in my kitchen browsing the web, probably Reddit, on my phone. My kids had been asleep for about an hour, and my wife was in our room finishing up a paper for work. There wasn't a radio or television on. While browsing in complete silence, I heard my wife cough several times. The cough sounded as if she had breathed in some water and was trying to get it out of her lungs. Jokingly, I jumped out of my chair and ran over to the room where she was sitting. I started patting her back and pulling her earlobes down, again in a joking manner. She looked at me like, "What the hell?" So I told her I was trying to help since she had coughed so hard. She, still with the what the hell face, looked at me and said that she hadn't coughed. I stood there and evaluated what I may have heard. I thought it might have been one of my kids, but the cough was from a woman. It wasn't a 4-year-old or 1-year-old girl's cough. Other things about this cough is that it came from inside the house. It was the type of hack like after water goes down the wrong pipe. It was one succession of coughs, about 4 of them together. How did the coughing not continue if the coughs were heard that hard at the beginning? It didn't and still does not make sense. But that's not the only thing that happened. Fast forward to the next morning. My kids are awake and eating in the kitchen. I'm in the living room watching TV, still waking and drinking coffee, and my wife is in our room getting ready for the day. All electronics are off except the TV and our phones. My wife's phone rings from what sounds like the kitchen area. She runs to the kitchen to answer it because she was expecting an important phone call from work. She searches for her phone in the kitchen, but does not find it. She asks if it was my phone that rang, but I told her no. My phone was in my pocket. Turns out, both my wife's work phone and personal phone are in our room on the other side of the house. We checked the kitchen and surrounding rooms for anything that could have made the ring, but we found nothing. I don't know the name of the ringtone, but it's a very common ringtone for iPhones. My wife and I searched for the reasoning of why we clearly heard a phone ring in the kitchen, but no matter how hard we tried, we were unable to find a logical explanation. I was going to write it off as just another weird coincidence, but I kept thinking of how clear the phone ringing was, and how my wife had heard it too. Add this one to the cough that I heard the night before, and I start to worry that there may be an intruder in my attic. I think, nah, not possible. But I have 2 little girls and a little boy too. It's a slim chance, but I'd feel better if I just went up there and checked. I texted my wife to watch the kids because I was worried that there might be an intruder. I didn't want to verbalize it because if they were up there, then they would hear me. I check outside and around the house first for any signs of a person being on the roof or anything like that. I look for cuts in the wall and see no signs of intrusion whatsoever. I then grabbed the ladder to get inside the attic. The only way into this attic is through a small 2x4 foot opening at the top of the interior of a closet in one of the rooms. I grab my flashlight and my gun, set the ladder up, and plan on entering the attic as quickly and tactfully as possible. I don't want the intruder to be lying in wait. I push the drywall that blocks the opening and can hear a door swing and shut. I say swing because it sounded like a door that was on a hinge or hinges. I can't get the drywall off, and the element of surprise is now gone. I push through anyway and inspect the attic. The attic has no floorboards. You have to navigate through it by standing on the supporting beams. It's extremely annoying to have to go up there to do housework. I find no signs of anyone being up there, no entry points, and again, no cuts in any of the walls. I come down and double check that my wife and kids had stayed in the living room like I had asked in case there was an intruder. She confirms that they were, and that no door had been shut. I pretty much already knew that the door shutting wasn't them because the sound came from the attic, but there's no door in the attic. I went through a checklist of explanations to the cough, the phone ring, and the door shutting, and again, have yet to encounter a single one that makes sense. I know it sounds weird, but a freaking portal is what I'm coming up with. I lived in this house for years, and have always heard weird noises, but never something like this. Most portal stories I've heard sound totally far-fetched. Usually a portal story includes a demon or something spiritual, but this was just totally random. People crossing dimensions to hang out in my attic? There's no malice, no sightings, no physical evidence, but the sounds were definitely heard and are inexplicable. Something else happened a few nights ago. It was around 11 p.m. I'm asleep in bed and am woken up to my wife shaking me. She tells me that she heard a door close. I say to her that it may be our 4-year-old, but she says she was watching the monitor and the cameras were on the kids. She said that she had been watching the monitor because she had been hearing weird noises. I say maybe it's just the house creaking. She claims that she heard the windows shake. Now this is significant to me because we do have some old windows. The difference between the old and new windows is that the old windows will rattle when a door is shut due to air pressure or when the house is shaking, earthquakes, and the new windows won't. So she heard a door close and the windows shake. That's enough for me to grab my gun and check for an intruder yet again. I do an interior and exterior check and of course find nothing. I go back to bed and once again conclude that there is a portal in my house. I was around 7 years old when this encounter happened. I was visiting my aunt and uncle's old house for dinner and a movie at their place. They reside in this town about 1 hour west of the city that I live in. It was around 10 p.m. and the sun had set. Darkness permeated the outdoors. I remember laying down on the couch watching a film, but I was half asleep. Before I intended on sleeping, I felt the urge to go urinate, so I made my way to the hallway leading to the bathroom. This is when things started to get weird. The hallway in the house has 2 doors on the left-hand side, and 2 doors on the right-hand side, followed by the bathroom door, which is straight ahead. The first door on the left was for storage, the second being my aunt and uncle's bedroom. The first door on the right led to the basement, and the second to the guest room. Before I made my way to the bathroom, I had the urge to look inside my aunt and uncle's bedroom, and I was in complete shock at what I saw. There was the silhouette of a slender figure dressed in what appeared to be an all-black dress suit, although it could have been anything, as this figure was darker than the darkness surrounding it. The thing was nearly 7 feet tall, but was not wearing a hat, and I couldn't make out any facial features. There was no way it could have been my family members, as they were all in the living room still watching the movie. As I was standing there in silence, the figure barely budged, and I just went on to do my business. As I left the bathroom, I looked back to see if this figure was there, and sure enough, it was gone. I bolted down the hallway and plowed my face into the pillows in fear. When my family asked why I ran into the couch like that, I mentioned that it was because I saw a ghost or something. They didn't think much of it at the time, thinking that kids, just have their imaginations. but I know what I saw. So back in high school, I was a rather shy girl. This was during or after the recession, and my family had gotten a bit tight on money. Usually I didn't eat lunch, and I had to hide that fact from the staff at the school, so I studied in the library or sat outside on the field behind the school for lunch. Rarely had I ever eaten or sat in the lunchroom. As the school year went on and neared its end, prom was coming up. I never had enough money for a prom dress, so I always turned down any offers to go, simply because I didn't want people to know that I couldn't afford a dress, let alone the ticket to go in. Between classes, when I had to walk through the cafeteria, I noticed that there was a younger boy who would always stare at me. His friends would pat his shoulder, and I read one of their lips one day as they told him to, quote-unquote, ask her. The group of boys just looking and smiling, except for the nervous one who was simply staring at me. I would look away to the floor and grip my textbooks closer to my chest, walking down another hallway. Anyway, I kept finding ways to sort of get past him without him noticing. Now I know this sounds mean, but I didn't know him. I couldn't afford it, and I also felt like he was dark inside. It was like every time I saw him, all I saw was a gray smoke around him, and there was a really uneasy feeling about it. Anyway, prom happened, and I lived right down the street from the high school, so I could hear the music and see all the kids driving down the road or walking to the school in their cool new clothes. As I sat there looking at the lights and the kids, I decided it was stupid to just watch the event happen without me, so I made myself go to sleep. A week or so after prom, I heard other kids in school talking about something, almost whispering. Apparently, the boy who wanted to ask me out to prom, he ended up asking another girl from another school. She said yes, but when she showed up to the house, her dad didn't like him and said that she shouldn't go. The boy then told the girl that he couldn't go to prom with her because something had come up and he wouldn't be going to prom with her at all. Those were his words. The father and the boy talked about it, and the father said that if he paid a portion for her dress, then they could go. The kid went back to the house and cut the screen to the back door with a knife. Then he unlocked it. Her father woke up and asked him what he was doing there, and the boy said, "I came to see you die," before charging at the father with a knife and a shovel. He managed to stab her dad 7 times. Her parents subdued the kid, and he was arrested and released on a $10,000 bond. The rest is history. So that's my prom night story. Oh yeah, and the dad did survive, which was great. So my story initially starts with me, an 18-year-old female, being a guitar player of 6 years. I started early in high school and loved to play. My guitar teacher was super chill and awesome, but he was no longer able to teach me as he was moving away. I felt like I still wanted to move forward with my learning, so I decided to look up other available guitar teachers nearby. I didn't have a driver's license back then, and my guitar case was too heavy for me to be traveling long distances for a couple of lessons a week. I find this one guitar instructor who lived surprisingly close, 4 or 5 streets down. We contacted, and he agreed to teach me. To give you guys a bit of an idea about this guy, he was a tall, slim, white guy. Even though he looked a tad on the scrappy side, you could definitely tell that he was strong. He would also mention how he did lots of outdoor sports. He looked to be around his early 40s, but I'm pretty sure he was actually in his mid-30s. He had these big, pale blue eyes, sunken cheeks, and was balding, had a shaved head. So yes, in retrospect, he did look rather disturbing, but I didn't want to go and judge a guy by looks at first encounter. On the first lesson, I went to his place with my guitar. But after seeing me play, he told me he couldn't teach me because he only taught beginners, even though I told him that I had played for 6 years. So for the rest of the time, we just jammed and chilled, and then I left. The next day, I got a text from him saying that he had an old guitar book he wasn't using and wanted to give to me. Earlier that day, I had a huge fight with my sister, so I was eager to get out of the house for a breather anyway. I met him at a halfway point to receive the book from him. After doing so, I said my goodbyes, but as I was leaving, he started to follow me. I was sort of confused at this point, but he just casually held conversation, so I just chatted with him on my way home. We got to my place. I dropped off the book, we played guitar together for a bit and hung out. Suddenly, he started talking to me about a waterfall near his place. I was confused because I'd never heard of this place. Why would there be a waterfall nearby? I live in an urban neighborhood. He was super shocked that I hadn't seen it and insisted that we go. It's only 10 minutes away, I promise. My stupid, naive ass agreed because he promised it was super close. So we headed out to this so-called waterfall. This is where shit went downhill. As we were walking to the waterfall, the conversation started to change. He asked what nationality I am, so I told him that I'm Korean. Suddenly, he hugged me super hard, saying, "I love Koreans." I was bewildered at this point, but I awkwardly let it pass. He started talking about himself and how he dropped out of high school early because he had violent tendencies. He said he threw tables at his teachers and threatened kids. I let him talk, but inside started to feel extremely uncomfortable. I was constantly checking around the street, but found there wasn't a single person to be seen. He continued to ask me uncomfortable things, like if I was a virgin, and how he liked to think about classical pieces in his mind while he had sex. I wish I was lying about that, but I'm not. At one point, he picked up a flower and tried to put it in my hair. I declined and pulled away from him. He told me that he liked flowers because he can preserve their beauty even after death. Now at this point, I'm shitting myself. My heart was pounding. I was terrified, but I didn't know how to tell him that I didn't want to go to this waterfall. It's been 20 minutes at this point, and no such place has been seen. I constantly asked him where the waterfall was, but he brushed it off, saying, "We're almost there." Eventually, after about 30 minutes of walking, we got to a random bush track. I'm beyond uncomfortable at this point, and my mind is racing for any excuse not to go in. I suddenly spotted a guy coming out of the bush track, and let me tell you, I couldn't have been more relieved to finally see another human being. I sent the guy a huge, pleading look, and he seemed perplexed. He glanced over at my guitar teacher, but didn't say anything and left. My heart sank. Now let me tell you, the guy actually wasn't lying about the waterfall. It really did exist. But who gives a shit at this point, right? I'm alone in a place I'm not familiar with a guy who is saying some really scary things. I let him walk ahead whilst behind my back I began texting my older sisters to call me ASAP. My phone rang, so I answered the call. My sister is on the line like, "What the fuck is going on? Are you still with that guy? Where are you?" I just faked a wobbly smile and answered, "Hey, what's up?" "What? You want me to come home right now? It's an emergency." Okay. Meanwhile, the guitar dude is watching me carefully. I told him I need to leave, and suddenly his facial expression changed. "Why?" he said in a low, intimidating way. His demeanor did a 180, no longer smiling. "Why do you have to do as your sister tells you?" His big, pale eyes were unblinking. I kept insisting that it was an emergency, but he was not budging one bit. He started demanding that the waterfall is literally right there, and we're so close. At this point, the bush track that we had walked was sloped downward. I was wearing a pair of boots at the time, but was constantly slipping as we ventured down. It had dawned on me that even if I were to run, it was most likely that I would either slip or he would catch up to me very easily. Inside, I'm freaking out like crazy because I honestly have no idea how to get back. So eventually I decide the best thing to do is just agree and get this over with. I weakly agree that we can go and see this godforsaken waterfall only for 5 minutes max, then I need to leave. He suddenly changed back to all cheery again, and he was leading me again down to the waterfall. By now I have thoughts that I might actually die here. If he were to harm me in any way, there would be no one to hear my cries. So when he wasn't looking, I started taking pictures of my surroundings. Random part of the bush track, some distinct rocks. Because my thoughts were, if I were to get murdered here, then maybe, just maybe, the police might find this phone and trace it to me. There are no words to truly express that feeling of, I am going to be murdered. If anything were to happen, would my family be able to find me? No one would ever suspect to look at a place like this. By this time, the sky was getting dark, and the guitar guy insisted on making a fire near the waterfall. I just agreed. He made a small fire, and we just sat in silence, staring at the flames for a bit. I heard a small sigh beside me, but continued to stare at the fire. After about the third sigh, I glanced over at him. He was staring straight at me with his huge, unblinking eyes, the flames making a disturbing shadow over his smiling face. He stayed like that for a solid 15 seconds. He began to scoot over closer and asked if he could give me a massage. I told him no. He then asked if I was cold and tried to cuddle me. So I stood up and said 5 minutes was up, and I needed to leave. He seemed satisfied that we did spend some time at the waterfall, so he agreed to take me home. The whole time back, he was constantly nudging me and asking me why I was so quiet. I was beyond too traumatized to answer. He forced his arm in mine, and we linked arms all the way home. It suddenly started to rain, and he just paused and forced me to face him. He asked me if he could kiss me. For once, I looked him straight in the eyes and said no. He seemed offended and asked why not. It's just a kiss. It doesn't mean anything. I told him no again, and he let it go. We're almost at my house, finally, before he stopped and said, "Well, this is yours." For a second I was confused, but realized he mistook my house for a couple blocks down. I just nodded and said goodbye to him. I walked in the driveway to the front door, waited until he was definitely gone, before I bolted out and all the way home. My sister answered the door, furious and demanding what the hell had happened and why I didn't answer her 50 missed calls. I didn't even have the energy to say anything. I just went upstairs to the bathroom, took a scathingly hot shower, and scrubbed my body clean 3 times. I know this story is extremely long, but trust me, this wasn't even all the creepy shit this guy said to me. He continued to send me messages and call me, but I ignored him. He began to grow angry and demanded for his book back. I eventually told one of my friends, who was mortified at what happened. She said to just ignore all his calls. I did have little comfort in the fact that he thought I lived a couple houses down. but was terrified every time the doorbell rang as I pictured one of my family members answering it to find him at the door with a knife to kill us all. My friend had insisted on going to the cops, but what was the point? I was 18, and technically he didn't do anything illegal. After I blocked his number, that was the last I'd ever hear from him. It took me another 5 years to recover from the trauma, though never completely. I'm a sheriff's deputy in a fairly busy county. Along with this job comes the unfortunate familiarity with what a decomposing human body smells like. To me, it's very similar to an animal carcass, but with a much sweeter odor. Not sweet in the sense that I enjoy it. Hell no. That smell normally means a bad night for me and another gruesome memory to add to my catalog of things that I would rather forget. With that out of the way, I'll get to what happened. Last night I was patrolling a geographically isolated area of the county which is very large and sparsely populated. Having completed the hour-long trek to the northwestern county line, I began driving through the mountains back toward civilization. About 25 miles from town, or the closest semblance thereof, I hit a straight stretch of highway through a wide valley. Since the weather was nice, I had my windows rolled down. As I passed the entrance of an old logging road, that familiar smell of sweet rot suddenly filled my car. Not just a whiff, a cloud of it filled the cab as if there was a week-old human corpse sitting in the front seat next to me. It was all too familiar, but this time, there was something else that I couldn't quite place. It lingered for a few moments, then went out just as quickly as it had entered. Realizing what I had just smelled, my heart sank and I pulled to the side of the road. I told myself that it was just a dead animal in the ditch, and that my mind was playing tricks on me. I turned my car around and drove slowly back toward the logging road. The closer I got to it, the smell became stronger, and I grew more certain that I was indeed about to find a body. Holding on to a shred of hope that I was wrong, I parked my unit on the side of the highway just before the dirt road. I radioed to dispatch, told them my location, and that I would be out of my unit for a moment. I didn't say why, to avoid an awkward disregard on a possible body on the side of the road. I shined my flashlight into the ditch, and into the encroaching briars and weeds as I walked closer to where I believed the source of the smell was. Once I was a few yards away from the dirt road, I saw the opening of a concrete culvert going under the highway. At this point, the smell was nearly as strong as it was when I had first passed. The opening of the culvert was about 3 feet in diameter, just large enough to hide a body inside. I cursed and held my breath as I leaned over and shined my light in there. It was just an empty tunnel stretching the width of the highway. Somewhat relieved, I stood and looked around. It smelled as if I was standing on top of whatever was emitting the odor. I searched around the brush for a moment, but found nothing. Thinking the origin might be on the opposite side of the highway, I crossed to the other ditch to continue searching. As I walked away from the other side of the road, the smell grew faint. I stopped at the opposite end of the culvert and peeked inside just to double check. The odor was nearly gone at this point. I stood up and checked my surroundings when I heard a crack in the bush behind me, and the smell engulfed me and was even stronger than before. Thinking for a moment that the wind must have shifted, I froze when I realized that the air was dead still. Whether it was fear or something else, a shiver went down my spine. In the distance, I saw headlights coming down the highway. As the car came near, the odor seemed to move away further into the bushes toward where I had heard the crack. The car stopped, and the passenger rolled down the window and asked if I was all right. I lied and told him that I was. I thanked him for checking, and walked briskly back to my car as they drove away. Then I got the heck away from there. Once I was able to get cell service, I called my friend who was patrolling the opposite side of the county. I explained what had happened, trying not to let on that I was spooked. Once I was done, he paused for a moment, then asked about the unusual hint of something which accompanied the smell. He asked if it was sulfur, and I put two and two together. It was sulfur that I had smelled. I asked if he thought that I had found a demon in the middle of nowhere, to which he simply responded with a concerned yes. A little background on this guy. He is the son of a missionary and has been around the world. He has seen, rather smelled this before, and told me that it was a very concerning experience. This spooked me even more because his responses were very out of character for him. There's always the chance of a very scientific explanation, and I hope that one is out there. I don't think this was paranormal, but it felt so real that it undid many of the knots in my heart. My father passed away 21 years ago, when I was 20 years old, leaving behind his mother, my grandmother, wife, my mom, and a daughter, me. 2 years before his death, my father had urged my grandmother to sell her small home and shift with us so that we could look after her in her old age. He built a decent house, considering he came from a very poor background, that we had to sell off after he passed away. My grandmother passed away 2 years ago. I often used to think about how our life would have been had he been still alive. He was an honest man, but in a powerful position. When he passed away, I was still in college and unmarried, with no exposure to the outside world. Had he been alive for a few more years, I could have used his guidance to fulfill my career plans. He was the only earning member of the family. After he passed away, nothing remained the same. We all struggled financially, emotionally, and ultimately physically. Then I got married to a verbally, financially abusive man. But I saw this dream only yesterday, never before it. I had not been thinking about him or of any of my difficulties before I went to bed. In the dream, I was in my grandmother's house, which again we had sold 23 years ago. She had passed away, but my father was alive. He was sadly looking at the empty house from his childhood. I asked him what he planned to do with the house. He said he would probably sell it, but he sounded very sad as he said it. Then I suggested if we should keep the house and just rent it out. This way, we could return to it whenever we want and have a financial backup too. My father said that in the face of financial difficulty, we have a bigger home to fall back on. But he seemed relieved that he didn't have to sell his childhood home. When I woke up, I realized that it had all felt so real, as if I had lived an alternate life. It was what life could have been. I cried, but I also felt that I had been lucky to be able to live in that life. Does anyone believe in alternate lives here? Do you think my soul had made a trip to an alternative life somehow? I was a senior in high school, and I always hung out with my sister, who was 5 years older than me, and her friends. That night it was us siblings, her best friend H, who was the same age as my sister, and our friend G, who was about 20 and enlisted in the army. We thought it would be a great idea, since it was close to Halloween, to play with a Ouija board for the first time. We got a Ouija board and decided to turn off all the lights in the house and light a few candles to really set the mood. So we sat on the floor of the living room and started our little game. I was sitting between H and G, across from my sister. It took a while, but we finally got a response when G asked if anyone was there. The planchette slid to yes. We kinda giggled because we thought it was one of us. But then it started spelling out Maman. My sister and I immediately go pale and make eye contact across the board. Our grandmother had passed away next door, about a year prior to this. Before we could ask another question, the planchette spelled out the word love. We still weren't convinced. A little spooked, but not scared. G then asked the board, "How many children do you have?" And the planchette slid to the number 2, which is the correct number of kids that our grandmother had. It's important to know that G and H didn't know very much about our grandmother. They came into our lives after our grandmother had passed, so they never met her. The planchette then spelled out the words, "Roll Tide." Now we live in Alabama, and my grandmother was the biggest Alabama football fan. She would watch every game. The Alabama football catchphrase is, "Roll Tide." My sister and I immediately begin crying because it just seems so unreal. And then the planchette starts moving again. This time it's sliding around and going to the word, "Goodbye." I ask, "Do you want us to stop playing?" And the planchette quickly slides to, "Yes." My sister doesn't want to stop. She asks, "But why? We want to ask you more questions." And the planchette quickly moves across the board to spell out the word, "Bad." That was more than enough for me. I felt like if this was my mama, and she was telling us to stop playing, maybe we should take her advice and quit while we were ahead. She said bad. Did that mean that something bad would happen? Or that doing that was bad, with the Ouija board? I don't want to find out. But after trying to convince my sister and friends, it did no good. The planchette keeps circling the board and going back to goodbye over and over again. Finally, everyone says goodbye because it's clear that nothing else was going to be discussed. But then, for some reason, I was talked into participating again. This time when something answered us back, the planchette moved across the board even faster. But it was between 2 letters only. Z-O-Z-O-Z-O. And that's all it would say. I don't know what the others felt, because we really didn't talk about it much. But to me, it felt like the room became colder. It was then unanimous that we did decide to say goodbye. We were shaking. Whatever we had just spoken to didn't feel right. My sister and I decided to sleep in the same bed. I remember lying in bed and being huddled together and just looking around the room. Every sound made me jump. I swear, I could see dark humanoid figures all around. Maybe it was paranoia, but I definitely did not sleep at all that night. I kept thinking about how Mama or whatever was imitating her had said bad, like it was a warning. My sister ended up getting rid of the board shortly after. I'm not sure what she did with it. I know her and some other friends tried to play with it again in a very old graveyard near our house with graves that dated back to the 1800s. While they were playing, they heard what sounded like footsteps in the woods around the graveyard, and what sounded like scraping on one of the headstones. I don't plan on touching another Ouija board again. As a kid growing up, I dealt with anger problems and would always let my emotions get the best of me, so my mom would always send me off to these residential programs. However, they weren't all that bad. If you did good, you could go on these what they called passes. It's when if you do good, you can come home for X amount of hours. So I was doing good, and already had been on a few of these passes, and I got to come home for 48 hours. It was Halloween and me, my mom, my sister, and a couple of friends got together and went to this haunted house. So when we arrived, there's a line of people who are waiting to enter, and I had to take a leak really bad because I had sat in the car for hours waiting to get there. I walked to the side of the building, and there's nothing but woods literally growing next to the building, like there were tree branches leaning against and on the structure. So, as I was taking this long leak, I heard something step on a couple of sticks, and I noticed a dark shadow figure on all fours creeping up toward me. It looked kind of like a human on all fours, but this was definitely not a human. Like I said earlier, I've dealt with a lot of problems during my childhood. I didn't even have a childhood, so I was very different from a lot of people in so many ways. I didn't have a big reaction to it. I just kind of watched it and made sure that I wasn't seeing things. I tried to keep an eye on it and called my friends over to where I was to get a look. They were caught up in a conversation, though, and weren't paying attention, so I tried to run over to get them and get their attention, and then run back to make sure this thing was still there. By the time I got them and ran over to the area, there was nothing. This thing had disappeared without a trace. I couldn't even explain to them what just happened. They didn't pay much attention to me after that. A couple of weeks went by and I just forgot about it and let it be. This happened to me when I was in high school. I was around 15, 16 years old, so it was around 2005 or 2006. Now, for context, this happened in France in a medium-sized city. I had to take one bus and one tramway, to get to my high school. It was about 45 minutes to a 1-hour trip. Usually classes start at 8:15 a.m. and the tram would be packed up with people as my high school was located next to the university and another high school. But that day my class started at 10 a.m. As a result, the tram was practically empty, which meant that I could get a seat for once. There was no seat by my side, only one seat in front of me. So I was sitting there listening to my music when a man sat down in front of me. He quickly started talking to me. I honestly don't remember what he was saying, but I was trying not to be rude as he seemed to have some sort of mild mental disability. But very quickly, he started asking me out. Remember, I was underage, and I definitely looked my age. He wondered if I wanted to go and get a drink. I said that I couldn't, that I had to go to class. He was very persistent. At some point, he took out his wallet and offered me money. I remember him saying something like, "If it's about money, don't worry about it." He pulled out about $200 in cash. I was already creeped out by now and couldn't wait to get out of that tram, but I was also too shy to get out and sit somewhere else. That's when he pulled out a piece of paper. He was holding it in the air, and I remember him doing a motion with his head like, "Look at this" type of motion. It was an article from a newspaper that he had cut and kept inside of his wallet. I only had a few seconds to read what the article was about. All I had time to see was that something had happened to a woman. She had been assaulted. But that's it. That's all I had time to read before he put it back away. Now, as if this wasn't creepy enough, he had a giant smile on his face, like he was proud of himself, that type of smile. Whether he knew that woman or if this was a random article he for some reason decided to keep with him at all times, it's just extremely unsettling. Not only that, but showing it to a random girl? Why? The piece of paper itself looked like it's been in his wallet for some time. It was a little torn, but definitely wasn't old. I eventually arrived at my stop. He kept insisting on meeting again. I denied and quickly walked to my school. After that, I saw him again, once, a few days later. This time the tram was packed again, but I still felt the need to hide behind the people surrounding me, just in case he would see me and come talk to me again. The second time I saw him was maybe 2 or 3 years after. He looked exactly the same. I recognized him instantly. He was walking in the streets of the city and didn't see me. I realized I didn't give a physical description of the man, so here it is. He was average height, dark brown hair on the chubby side. He had glasses on, and the 3 times I saw him, he was always carrying a big backpack. The exact same military green backpack, and the same jacket. This paranormal encounter took place at the hotel I worked at last year. I was 20 years old, working at a small mom-and-pop hotel in Ontario, California. I had worked there for some time before I started to stay there for a few months. The owner taught me everything that I needed to know so that I can run his business while he went on a business trip to Africa. Mind you, I didn't have a car, so my only option was to stay there and work around the clock if need be. I didn't have to pay for the room, and I got to wash my clothes in the laundry room. There was a grocery store in walking distance, and restaurants all around me where I could get food at a discounted price since I worked at the hotel. I thought this was a sweet deal. One night, my boyfriend came down to visit, and while he was in the bathroom, I heard banging coming from the room next to ours. Then, I heard scratching on my walls. I told him to stop playing, and he didn't even know what I was talking about. The banging continued all night, so I called the front desk and told them that the people next to me were loud and that I had to be up at 6 to go down there to work. She was quiet for a moment, and then she told me that she hadn't rented out the room next to mine. Mind you, I had an end room. I quickly ran outside to see if the curtains were open or closed, and they were open. I could see right into that room, and no one was there. I had never been so creeped out in all my life. I decided to sage the room to get rid of any bad spirits or energy, and that worked for a while, until it didn't. The next time, something demonic happened. I was asleep and kept hearing whispers in my sleep. I hate whispers with a passion, and they creep me out to the fullest. So I sat up in bed and I was looking around the dark room, and in the corner of the room, I saw white, glowing eyes staring at me. I felt frozen by its glare. I could see its body and saw that it was crouched down, holding its knees. Then I saw more shadows appearing closer and closer. I went to turn on the lamp next to the bed, and it didn't cut on. So my next thought was that I needed to run outside and get to safety. It took all the balls in the world for me to get up and do that. I was so scared that I couldn't even feel my legs. All I could feel was the cold wooden floor beneath me. I got to the door and flung it open, only to see that the bedroom curtains were on the outside of my room's window. The sky was black, and the clouds were a dark green with gray tint. I was mortified to realize that I was still asleep, and that I hadn't actually woken up. I looked back inside the hotel room and saw myself asleep in the bed. I screamed bloody murder, and that's when I jolted awake for real. I said a prayer and went back to sleep. The encounter that followed was even worse. Yet again, I could hear things in my sleep. I was terrified and couldn't move any part of my body. I began to pray in my head as loud as I could, only to wake and feel my body slam on the bed as if I had been levitating. I called my grandma the next day, and she said that it was a demonic attack. I got my car shortly after a few days later, and never stayed in that hotel again. I first discovered the Ouija board when I was 14. A girl was visiting from America, I'm in the UK, and she told us how to talk to ghosts. 8 of us went to her house and made a board with ripped bits of paper and a turned wine glass. 4 of us would put our fingers on the glass, and we would swap someone out every so often. This way we believed that it would eliminate anyone who might be pushing the glass. I'll add here that the finger that had been in the glass always felt cold afterward. Don't know if others have noticed this. The first few days were spent asking silly questions like, does so-and-so fancy me, or who will I marry, etc. On the 3rd day, things took a darker turn, and we started getting responses told to us without asking. It started saying things like, so-and-so will get run over, and X will die of cancer, and other really freaky shit. This scared us, and we stopped playing. Years later, in my early 20s, I shared a flat with my brother and boyfriend at the time, and bored one night we decided to do a Ouija board. So we made a board, as I had when I was younger, and set to it. It didn't take long for the glass to move, and we asked who it was, where they came from, and how they had died. It told us its name was Bill. He was an old hippie, and he had died from an overdose. Anyhow, things went on for a while, then my boyfriend, who was convinced that we were the ones pushing the glass, said if there's really a ghost here, prove it. I kid you not a second later, the lights went out. At that time, I had one of those old-fashioned meters that you had to put money in, so after my initial shock, I reasoned that I needed to put a coin in the meter and stood up to do it. But before I got to the door, the lights came back on. Somewhat spooked, I sat back down and me and my brother put our fingers back on the glass. My boyfriend point-blank refused. The glass then spelled out, "Chilly trick, hey." After that, it kept going in circles and moving toward me, so I decided that enough was enough and said goodbye. A few years ago, after Facebook started and I got back in touch with my old school friends, I heard that one of them had died of cancer in his late teens. Not sure about the other prophecy, but I know that I'll never do a Ouija board again, and I firmly believe that we do tap into forces beyond our five senses. Disclaimer. I am completely aware that this story involves me being very stupid and careless. I'm not going to inject these acknowledgments into the story, but rest assured that in hindsight, I am aware of the foolishness that took place. Now, where to begin? The year was approximately 1998 or 1999. I was a young gay man in my early 20s, living in a medium-sized city in the Midwestern US. This was sort of an in-between transitional time for gay people, where in most populous areas we had enough respect to live openly, but there was still plenty of people who did not like us. It was well before the invention of smartphones, and the internet was still in the early stages of mass adoption. There were large communities online, but it was not yet at that point where most Americans were online. Online socialization consisted of chat rooms hosted by various services like AOL, Yahoo, or IRC servers, and message boards were still in use by large numbers of people. For gay men at the time, it was nothing short of revolutionary. Prior to the internet and to the broader cultural changes, gay men had been stuck looking for fun in secretive and/or shady places due to the inability to freely express ourselves. In the 90s, it was still somewhat risky, but the internet offered a way to talk freely and relatively anonymously without the risk of being outed or worse. For this reason, it really took off in the gay communities, and gay men were a very large part of the user bases for these social platforms. It was suddenly very easy and relatively safe to find dates, friends, or just sex, and it quickly became the norm for a lot of gay men. On the other hand, being such a new tool for most people for communication, we were sometimes blind to the risks. Being an attractive young man in my prime, I made liberal use of the online communities to find dates. That is to say, I had plenty of hookups. My city had a decent number of chat rooms and personal message boards, and I had mostly great experiences. I met the typical assortment of good guys, closet cases, and the weirdos that you would expect. I was an absolute quote-unquote hoe by most standards, but suffice to say that a cute gay guy at that time could generally have a lot more dates than your typical straight person. At some point during this time, I had some brief chat on a message board with a guy from my city. I forgot his screen name, it's been over 20 years, so let's call him Slim Guy 65. This back and forth had happened on a general thread in the gay section, not in private messages, so it was visible to anyone who chose to read that thread. Nothing had come of it, but a week later, I received an email from an unrecognized address. The email basically said, "Hey, I'm not gay and I don't agree with the gay lifestyle. I'm here because my friend met this guy, Slim Guy 65, from the message board, and the guy really hurt him. I don't want to see this happen to anyone else." My friend tried to tell the police, but they wouldn't do anything. I see you're talking to Slim Guy 65, so just be careful and stay away from him. Okay, I thought. That's strange. What does this person mean by really hurt him? Was his heart broken? Did he get beaten up or verbally abused, or what? I responded to the email, asking for clarification on what exactly had happened. I never received a response. I was slightly weirded out by it, but on the other hand, it's an anonymous email from someone who doesn't respond and is vague about their warning. This could be anything. It could be some disgruntled ex trying to mess with the guy. It could be a real warning about some gay bashing. It could be someone trolling who doesn't have anything to do with anyone. I kept it in the back of my mind, but pretty much shrugged it off. Several weeks later, I had a weekday off of work and decided to take to the internet, as was my custom. Lo and behold, I had an email response to a personal ad. It was Slim Guy 65. He was offering to meet at his place to hang out and just have a good time. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I won't go into the details. As I recall, there weren't really many details discussed other than small talk and intros that we had done previously. Nothing about this guy was really sounding interesting to me, but I had no other offers on this day, so I decided why not. I'll go see what this dude is about. As I typed my reply, I suddenly remembered the strange email that I had received warning me about this person. I went back and reread it. Still vague, still presenting more questions than answers. Should I take this anonymous warning at face value and just ignore SG65? I decided to go check him out anyway. His address was on a rather busy street in the middle of a dense residential area, not some shack out in the woods, and I can handle myself. If he's weird, I can just nope out of there. Before long, I arrived at the house at the agreed time. It was a duplex-style home, with one apartment on the ground floor and one on the second floor, part of a row of several identical duplexes. It was the middle of the afternoon, there was plenty of traffic on the street, and the occasional person out on their porch or their backyard. I pulled up the driveway to the parking area behind the house, got out, and knocked on the door. The guy that answered was a pretty normal, kind of mousy-looking man, probably in his 40s. Slight, slim build, soft-spoken, looked like just about any guy working in any office cubicle anywhere. Not really my type, but honestly, my curiosity was piqued, and I had nothing better to do, so I stepped inside to take a look around and gauge the situation with the warning email fresh in my mind. I stepped into the back door, into the kitchen. It was very clean, and there was nothing out on the counters, no table, no chairs, nothing. That is to say, it did not look like someone was living there. It had been kept up and cleaned, but was empty. Looking out into the apartment, I could see that it was not set up as a living space. It had a large window with sliding glass that was between the kitchen and living room, and I could see what looked like a large table out in the living room area. SG65 said something like, "This isn't where I live. A friend of mine used to run a doctor's office here and I maintain the building for him. It's private though, we have the place to ourselves." Weird. Okay. He shut the back door and locked it with a keypad deadbolt. The kind you need a key to open, even from the inside, and put his keys in his back pocket, saying, "So what do you want to do?" At this point, my danger sense spiked. This is not a normal home, and why is he locking the door like that? It's not necessarily suspect. A lot of people have that sort of lock on their door, and the door has a window in it, so it makes sense even. Still, something is not right here, I can tell, and now I'm locked in. I asked him why he was locking the door like that, which immediately flustered him. He was looking around rather nervously, and his voice was wavery and halting. Not quite stuttering, but almost. He said, well, we don't want someone to come in and interrupt us, right?" Flashing a weak, unconvincing smile. His demeanor and body language were all I needed to confirm that this guy was up to no good, or at least that there was something he was hiding. However, I could tell that I was intimidating him. I wasn't a particularly muscular kid, but I have a larger frame. Like, even when I'm at my thinnest, I still wear size L tops and 36 waist pants, so I look big, which people tend to interpret as me being stronger than I really am. Also, I'm not a tough guy at all, but I have a resting facial expression that makes me look like a thug. People who don't know me often assume that I'm rough or something. I sometimes use this to my advantage while I can, because before long a new acquaintance will eventually figure out that I'm a total wimp. But this was definitely an occasion to play up the tough guy appearance, and I did exactly that. I put on my best steely face and told him to unlock the door, and that I don't want to be locked in here. He looked for a moment like he was going to pee his pants, then said, "Okay, alright, I'll unlock this." He unlocked the deadbolt. "And I'll just lock the knob here." And he turned the little dial that locks the doorknob. That was fine with me. I continued to stare at him until he said, "I'll leave the keys on the counter right here," and he set his keys down near the sink. I was relatively satisfied with that answer. At this point, though, my adrenaline was flowing, and I was almost in full flight or fight mode. But I was stuck, kind of stuck in place. The guy was between me and the door. I was freaked out, but this little weasel did not appear to pose any immediate physical threat to me. I could tell that his pant pockets were empty, and that I was intimidating the living hell out of him. I didn't yet know exactly what to do. Now keep in mind that despite my wordy descriptions, this all happened very quickly without any really long pauses. It had only been maybe 1 to 2 minutes since I had stepped in the door. This all happened at the pace of a conversation. The guy was obviously nervous and trying not to appear so. He said, "Well, let's go in," and walked a wide path around me through the kitchen into what would normally be the living room, and toward the hall to the right from there. I was familiar with this floor layout. It's very common in the area. The hallway would lead to 2 small bedrooms, with a bathroom in between them. I hesitated, thinking that I should just walk out that back door and take off. But really? Now I was super curious. I knew there's no way in hell I'm doing anything with this guy, but I kinda want to see what's going on in here. Also, I'm confident that he can't take me if it comes to a fight. So, I slowly headed toward the living room. It felt like I was walking in slow motion. From the kitchen entrance, I could see a large, rectangular, stainless steel table taking up a lot of the living space. I remember thinking this looked like a surgical table. It looked like it could rise and tilt, and it had a recessed channel running all the way around the edge. In hindsight, I now know what it was. It was 100% a mortician's table. Dude had a mortician's table in there. But at the time, I just thought it looked like some sort of medical table. There were some other office-type cabinets and stuff around, I think, but now all I really remember is the table itself. The large front window looking out onto the street was covered by vertical blinds that were closed. SG65 said something like, "This used to be a doctor's office, like I said. Come on back here." The hallway revealed the room setup that I had expected. The first bedroom door was closed. The second door was open to a very small, very clean bathroom. At the end of the hall was the other bedroom, which looked like, if the doctor's office story were true, had at one time been converted to an exam room. He said, "We can go in that room if you want. Go ahead and take a look." And he stayed by the other closed bedroom door. The back bedroom door was open, and I could see the walls were covered in a honey-colored wood paneling, the type you might see in a den or office that hasn't been updated since the early 70s. I slowly took a few steps toward that door, trying to be very aware of what Mr. Creepy was doing behind me. He didn't move. When I got up to that room, the first thing I noticed was the door had a keypad deadbolt lock, just like the back door. This room locked from the outside. I wondered if there was a lever on the inside, but I pretty much know the answer to that question without needing to check. I also saw a chair. A non-swiveling, plastic desk chair with thin metal legs sitting near the center of the room. The room had old, dark carpet and those wood-paneled walls. I noticed that the walls were completely paneled with no windows, and I know that room had at least one window, probably two, so whoever did that paneling went over them on purpose. There was also a phone in there plugged in and sitting on the floor. It was an old office phone, probably from around the 80s or early 90s, dingy beige plastic with several buttons to manage different phone lines. It was just sitting there on the carpet near the wall with the chair at a slight distance facing the phone. There was nothing else in that room. I was standing at the threshold of the room, with one foot slightly in, absolutely not going past that door frame. I looked back at Dude. He was still standing by the other door, just nervously smiling at me, trying very hard to look casual, but obviously very nervous or something. He said something like, "Well, what do you want to do?" Instead of answering, I felt around the back side of the deadbolt lock. Sure enough, nothing there but the smooth wood of the door. It also dawned on me that I did not see a light switch anywhere for the ceiling lamp. Where was the switch? Who knows? It should have just been on the inside of the door, of course, but that original switch was covered by the paneling. He mumbled something about not having the key to that lock. Don't worry about it. I turned back to face the guy and just said, "What is it that you want to do in here?" My skin had gone ice cold as I realized that I was way, way, way too far into this apartment. I was running through my options in my head. What was this guy going to do? He didn't appear to have any weapon or anything in reach, but who the hell knows what goes on in that place? What are you trying to do? He was almost totally derailed by that. He stammered out, "Some hot man-to-man fun?" With the weakest smile that I have ever seen, looking like he was just a hair's breadth away from panicking. That sounds comical, but really, that sentence was probably the most chilling part of the entire experience for me. It was the way he said it. Like he had to come up with something on the fly, something that would sound plausible, and he failed. Who says that in real life? "Hey, do you want to have some hot man-to-man fun?" Nobody. It's something you'd see on an advertisement for a cheesy porn site or something. That was it. I said, "Nope, I want to go, I'm leaving." He said, okay. I quickly walked past him as he flattened himself against the wall to avoid me, and I noped right out through the living room dissection area and through the kitchen to the back door, which was thankfully still not deadbolted. The keys were still on the counter. I let myself out and didn't bother closing that as I saw him slowly coming to the door behind me. I deliberately walked, not ran, to my car. Looking back at the building, I could see that indeed there was a window facing the backyard area from that paneled room, but of course it was covered up from the inside. Dude was shutting and locking the back door, and I left. Heart pounding, skin icy cold, thinking, holy crap, what was that? So, was this guy some sort of killer? Or was he just an awkward, closeted gay guy with access to a sterile-looking apartment with an autopsy/mortuary table and a windowless room that locks from the outside, with a chair and a phone and no light switch? It's clear to me that the poor soul who walks into that room gets locked in. He probably shuts off the light from somewhere and calls the phone. Other than that, it's anyone's guess as to what actually happens. I assume the friend of the judgmental person who emailed me must have been some kid that got locked in for whatever game ensues. Driving home, at first I thought, of course I have to call the police and tell them what's in that place. But thinking it through, I realized that I didn't really have any crime to tell them about. I went to meet a man for casual sex, and what? He has a room with a chair in it? He has, as I thought at the time, an exam table? The police aren't going to do anything with that story. The guy didn't touch me or do anything to me, and I left. I considered calling an anonymous tip line, but again, what exactly would I report? There was no actionable crime. Also, keep in mind that at that time, while the local police in the city were pretty decent, they weren't especially interested in getting involved with helping out the gays. They would prosecute actual crimes if it was cut and dry, but I heard plenty of accounts of them not choosing to follow up on cases where there was not an easy arrest to be made. I decided not to report anything because nothing would come of it except drawing unwanted attention to myself. Even in retrospect, I think that was probably the most rational choice to make. If this happened today in 2020, the law enforcement would probably be a lot more interested in it, but back then, not so much. So, live and learn. I still drove past that house once in a while during the normal course of life over the next several years, and I'd pay attention to how it looked. The vertical blinds were closed for maybe 5 or 6 years whenever I went past. Then, eventually, the blinds were down, and there were decorative curtains in the windows, so I assumed that the place was eventually sold to someone who actually lived in it. Around 2002, maybe 2003, there was the murder of a young man on the news. He had been found in the next state, which borders on my city, so it's not very far away. I recognized the guy from the gay community, but didn't know him personally. A friend mentioned to me something about the local serial killer. I said, "What?" He explained that a few young men had gone missing over the past year, each after being at one specific dive bar, and each being found several miles to the north past the state line, and out in the country. The case on the news matched with that MO. My friend told me that the young guy had been at that bar and left with someone that night, and that he had disappeared. The news report didn't mention anything about a gay bar or similar recent cases, of course. I had to wonder if my acquaintance from the internet had anything to do with it. The location of the murders apparently was nowhere near that duplex, or at least according to the story I was told. I never heard of a resolution to that murder on the news, or any official mention of a suspected serial killer other than gossip. Lately, I've been dreaming about pretty weird stuff. I can't remember everything, of course, but I'm going to try to explain it to the best of my ability. About 1 week ago, I started dreaming more often, and I could remember them clearly when I woke up. But after about 2 days, some inconsistencies popped up. At the end of the dream, I would start hearing weird noises. This, of course, didn't bother me until 2 days ago when I woke up very early, about 6 in the morning, and the sound was still there. I jumped out of bed and turned on the lights and noticed that my window cover, a sliding cover since my roof is slanted, was pretty much wide open. My window is right under a streetlight, so I always close it because I need complete darkness to sleep. When I jumped up and turned on the lights in my room, the sound immediately stopped. It's hard to explain the noise, but it sounded like the flapping of a piece of clothing against the window. I'm pretty sure that it shouldn't have happened because that's my only window, and there is never any draft in my room. I decided to just go downstairs and forget about it since I was probably still just half asleep. This is where it got weird. I have a little decorative Captain America shield on the desk in my room, which is next to the door. This is important. I started dreaming normally, superpowers and stuff, until I somehow made it back to my home in my dream, and in my dream I sat down behind my desk with the door open. When I look out of the door from my desk, I see the closet doors from across the hall. In my dream, I remember that I started to fall asleep behind my desk, and I could see out of the corner of my eye that the closet door started to open. When I looked up and blinked, it was all normal again. This happened once more. But the third time I looked up, and the closet door kept opening. So I got scared and threw the Captain America shield at the closet door. In my dream, not in real life as far as I know. And then I jumped out of my bed, scared. When I turned the lights on at, again, 6 in the morning, the shield was gone, and lying on the floor next to me. I was very sure that that shield had been on my desk when I went to sleep. I was sleeping the other night, and I remember waking up, or rather, so it seemed, yet it still felt like I was dreaming. I was lying in bed and remember sitting up and seeing 3 figures standing in my room with a dimly lit blue light coming from somewhere that illuminated them. I don't remember exactly what they said, or rather he said, because the one in the middle was speaking directly to me. I remember his mouth opening in a very inhuman way with the jaw extending further than it should be able to. Their mouth and eyes were black. Not like solid black, but a smoky type of black, so sort of gray, but you could still recognize teeth and such. I remember them saying something about them coming in a few days, but I don't remember what it was exactly. I then remember passing back out and waking up, actually waking up, and seeing some dark form dart across the room and hover directly over my bed. My bed is in a corner, so it was sitting or hovering between the wall and I, with about a 4-inch gap at the top at the time. I then felt a very, very intense sensation of dread and heaviness throughout my entire fiber and being, and recall feeling this for a few minutes while it was just sitting there with my back turned to it. Then, out of nowhere, a sense of euphoria and great peace came over me. No longer did I fear or dread anything, but rather I felt happy, at peace, loved. I don't really know how to describe it. I remember that thing, whatever it was no longer there. I'm not religious, but I am spiritual in the sense of believing and following my own route when it comes to what happens after human death. I believe in a very unique form of reincarnation, in which the soul, essence, energy, consciousness, whatever you want to refer to it as, travels until it finds a new place to call home, and it could span across the entire universe. That being said, I couldn't help but feel like there was actually an evil presence there with me in my room, and a guardian angel, or some other known source of good energy, cast it out. This happened a couple of weeks ago, and I'm still in disbelief. Little background, I work second shift and get off late at night, where cops are on the hunt for drunk drivers. Quite literally, like the title says, I was driving home from work when I pulled up to a red light. With me at the light was a police officer, nothing too out of the ordinary, but after the light turned and they sped off, I maintained a decent tail on the cop, never taking my eyes off of them. With me at the light was a police officer, nothing too out of the ordinary, but after the light turned and they sped off, I maintained a decent tail on them, never taking my eyes off the car. I cannot stress the fact that that isn't an over-exaggeration, because I for sure did not stop looking at the cop car. Eventually I caught up to the car and boom, it was just a normal car. I never saw another car join us on the road. Nobody passed me, and nobody left the road. The cop car didn't turn off, and I didn't lose sight of the car. I obviously wasn't under the influence of anything save caffeine, which I'm accustomed to. It's honestly freaking me out, still. Let me start this off by saying that it is imperative that you stay off of the deep web. No matter what anyone tells you, no good can come from using it, and I am about to inform you as to why. I was 15 at the time. I had come home from school on a Friday afternoon ready to relax, kick back, and enjoy the short break. I had started using code about a year prior. Nothing too fancy, just basic Python, Java, HTTP, etc., and was practicing it daily. Now, I had known about the dark web before this took place. I would sometimes buy weed off of it, but that was about the extent. This particular day, however, I decided to venture further and really take a look at the dark web. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the iceberg diagram representing the internet's content. For those who don't know, the surface web contains about 10% of the internet's content, while the deep and dark web take up over 90%. I was ready to see what it really held. I heard stories about what goes down on the deep web, murder, inhumane torture, etc. But I didn't really believe that they were all legit. So I hopped on Tor and began to see what I could dig up. I started off by going on the hidden wiki and browsing through various websites, most of which contained illegal things such as drugs, hackers, and hitmen for hire, and lots of CP. I clicked on a random forum link, which took about a minute to load. I wish I could remember the name of it. It was a forum where people could pick a topic that they wanted to talk about, such as politics, dealing with mental health, etc. I noticed one of the topics was a pedo forum, and I don't want to even go into detail on what I saw there. There was one particular one that caught my eye. The link was all in red, while the rest were all black. It said, "Not for the weak, enter at your own risk." Curious as to what this was, I click on the link and it brought me to a forum that had only one other link on the whole page. I clicked that link and it brought me into a chat room. I realized that nobody was saying anything in it, only sending links. This set off alarm bells in my head because I had an idea of what was on those links. I wish that I had listened to my gut feeling, which was telling me to close out while you still can. However, the ignorant, curious teen took over me, and I started setting up some protection for myself using the code that I had learned. I later realized that this amateur coding I did would not protect me from these advanced people with malicious intent. I clicked on a random link and a page loaded surprisingly fast. It looked to be another chat room. I went to type hello or something, but it wouldn't let me. I sighed and began moving my mouse to go to the previous page when a noise went off. I had received a chat. The message said, "Hello, new user. I see you have found my site. Would you like to continue?" I tried typing again, but I still couldn't. The next message sent chills down my back, and my hands were shaking. It read, "No, son, not the keyboard." I tried turning off my computer, of course, but nothing worked. Another message popped up saying, "I guess I'll take that as a no." The screen suddenly changed, and a video began playing. It was a black screen, but I could hear a deep male voice say, "Unfortunately for you, you do not have a choice." I grabbed a sticky note and put it over my webcam, and the voice on the screen said, "Ah, so we're playing games now, huh?" The video then began to change, and I realized the man was taking his hand off the camera. He was a short man, maybe 5'7" tops, but that brought me no comfort. He held up a knife and said, "Name any body part." I then for the first time noticed a cloth in the corner of the room, covering up something which I could only assume to be a body. I had had enough. I unplugged my computer and lay on the floor panting for hours until I could finally get up. I now suffer from anxiety and won't touch a computer unless I absolutely have to. I had to have a Ouija board for Christmas. My wife refused to buy one, so I did it anyway. One night, when my wife was out, my daughter and I tried to use the board. Nothing. The planchette didn't move at all, or if it did, I could feel my daughter pushing it. As I suspected, it's just a parlor game. Move ahead 2 weeks. While working in the garage on a guitar amplifier that I was building, I had a very strong feeling that I was being watched. As I had spent many hours previously on this project without any sensations, this was disturbing. It got so bad that I couldn't spend more than a minute or so in the garage after the initial encounter without the hairs on my neck going up. Then came the whispers. More like a shh, shh sound, actually. Kind of a be quiet between 2 or more people lurking about. This only happened when entering the garage from the house. And later, when my daughter called me at work to say she heard shh, shh, when entering the darkened dining room. Since she was alone at the time, I blamed it on the cats. I too experienced it in the house, but usually only when entering the garage itself. Finally, I decided that enough is enough. I went into the garage one night and yelled at whoever was there that they had to leave because they were scaring the crap out of us. No more whispers after that. I wasn't yet into paranormal investigations at the time, so I didn't have a digital audio recorder to leave in the garage overnight. It bothers me now that I had real live spirits in the house to test with, and I didn't have the equipment or the moxie to do anything. I live in a small town, and things like rumors tend to spread pretty quickly since folks around here are incredibly nosy beings. The most trusted source of these rumors is the local bar located in the center of the small settlement that we live in, which my father visits frequently. It is right by the school that I go to. Anyway, 2 weeks before all this bullcrap started, he came back with quite the story. It is said that something off has been going on with our town's graveyard, which is right by these creepy old woods a little bit away from the town itself. Usually takes 20 minutes to get there by car. Apparently, drunkards there claim that there's a medium disguised as a homeless man hanging around the woods surrounding the graveyard, and that sometimes he can even be found by the graves eating bread. At first, I didn't believe it, so me and my friend decided to walk to the graveyard and hang around there trying to find that guy. So we did, and the graveyard was full of people for a few hours, but the normal kind of people. A few more hours passed, and soon there was no one left except for an old, bearded man on the bench by the football field across the woods in the parking lot. He was looking at empty plastic bags with a box of cigarettes resting beside him. Nothing suspicious. My friend had the guts to walk up to him and insult him. I walked away from her, but when she crossed the line, I pulled her away, telling her that he may be a serial killer or a crazy drug addict. But he remained quiet until she yanked her hand away from mine, grabbed his box of cigarettes, and crushed it under her feet. She also threatened to hurt him if he didn't speak, and that's when he stood up and looked her dead in the eyes, and he was much taller than her too. He told her something along the lines of, "You are a disgrace in the eyes of God," and walked away onto the road until we lost track of him. I started to worry, and told her that maybe he was a priest or a monk, and now was going to tell everyone in our town how she had mocked him, and I was actually afraid. She reassured me that he was none of these things, because he had cigarettes with him, but I think those weren't even his. That night I slept over at her house because I was scared to go back to mine alone. I woke up in the middle of the night, and since I was sleeping in the same bed with her, I had a clear view of the pitch-black shadow of a man standing over her right beside her bed, his palm on her wrist. I raised my body, getting ready to stand up, but he turned his head to me and started to shake it from left to right. So I figured it was a lucid dream and rolled over to the other side, drifting back to sleep. The next morning, she looked pale and ghostly, and I asked her if she got enough rest. She informed me that she did not even sleep, and kept having problems with her breathing and her heartbeat. I was so scared that I almost pissed myself right there and then, and as of now, I am home alone and feeling like I am being watched. This all happened very recently. I'm a young woman who works late nights at a bar in a city, but I live in a rural area outside of town. It was a very slow night, so we closed early and one of the bouncers walked me to my car. I didn't particularly notice anyone following me while I was on the main roads, just a normal sprinkling of traffic. I first noticed them when they turned onto one of the super small roads that leads toward the area where I live. It was strange because people rarely pull off onto that road at the same time as me, as it isn't very populated at all. But as soon as we were on the winding and unlit road, they began to behave strangely. They'd flash their bright lights at me, and then ride my bumper until they were practically scraping it, and then pull really far back away. I tried speeding up and slowing down, but that didn't seem to matter. When we came to the first intersection, they turned on their signal to go right. But when I went straight, I watched them in my mirror turn the nose of their car to the right, pause for a few seconds, and then follow behind me. This continued for a while. At the next intersection, I signaled left and waited until they did too, and then quickly turned right, and of course, they followed. I then called the cops and told them I was headed toward a gas station I knew to be open and was the only place remotely nearby that might have people at it since almost nothing is 24-hour right now. They said they dispatched police to meet me there, and I tried to focus on driving slowly so that I didn't beat them. When I got to the gas station, I pulled into the little turn lane, which made the car pause and then quickly step on the gas and squeal around the corner. I only really had time to glimpse at the general look of the car and the driver's face. They were alone and very weird looking. Incredibly pale, like albino pale, with short, equally pale hair. They were completely androgynous, at least from what I could see, and they stared at me for a second before bolting away. The police took like 20 minutes to arrive after that. Typical. So I just sat in front of the gas station and watched the road for cars with my doors locked. The police said there wasn't anything they could do. My general assumption was that it was a patron from work, but we'd had so few customers, I feel like I would have recognized them. I don't understand why they would have followed me the full hour, only to begin making themselves that obvious. I have always been interested in the paranormal and going ghost hunting, as me and my friends called it. This story takes place on an October night in 2005. We had gathered at my dad's house for a party. We lived way out in the country, in an old farmhouse. We decided to drive up the road to an old cemetery because one of my friends showed up with a Ouija board. I said we weren't going to use it at my house, but I was game to use it somewhere else. About 6 of us piled into different vehicles and took off. When we got there, we set the Ouija board up on an old concrete barrier that surrounded the entrance of the cemetery. For context, the cemetery was set on a hill surrounded by cow pastures, fields, and trees. Across the road stood an old, white church. There were 2 security lights that lit the church area and the entrance to the cemetery. There was one more security light that lit the field next to the only house for about 2 miles. We all stood in a circle, Planchette in the centers, hands all on it. My friend led the seance and asked if there was anything in the cemetery with us. At first nothing happened and we all stood still and quiet. Then the Planchette slowly moved toward yes. Immediately we all started accusing each other of moving it, but everyone swore that they didn't. An eerie feeling fell over us as the Planchette moved back to the center of the board. About that time, we heard what sounded like wind initially, but began to get closer. It sounded like the footsteps of multiple people running in circles all around us. We were all wide-eyed, looking at each other when someone said, "I'm out." Another person said, "We have to tell it bye or the spirits will follow." The leader of the group spoke to the board and said something along the lines of, "We are saying goodbye to you," and the Planchette quickly jerked to no. It was pretty obvious by how shocked we all were that none of us had done that. Mind you, the sound of the footsteps are still surrounding us. The Planchette moves to the center and we say bye again. Again, it moves to no, then back to the center. This time we all say it together, my friend's idea, and slowly, agonizingly slowly, moved the Planchette to the word goodbye. We were relieved and took off running to the cars, which were parked at the entrance of the cemetery on the side of the road. Me and a buddy jump into my truck, and I hear my friend scream something about not being able to find their keys. She checks the ignition, her pockets. All our friends check the car and their pockets. No keys. Everyone else loads back into the truck, and we speed the 3 miles down the road to my dad's house. My friend searches her purse and pockets for the keys again, and again we couldn't find them anywhere. Eventually, someone takes her home, and she says she'll get her spare and get a ride back to her car in the morning. We were all too scared to go back and look that night. The next day, my friend searches the cemetery and never finds the keys, even in broad daylight. We hadn't walked around a whole lot, and where we used the Ouija board was very close to where we had parked our cars. Me and several friends scoured the entire cemetery over the next week or so and never did find them. My friend said she was 100% positive that they were left in the ignition when she got out of the car. It's where I left mine, and a common practice in the area where I'm from, which, like I said, is pretty rural. This was by far my scariest, but not the only Ouija board experience that I have. My boyfriend at the time and I went to Key West in 2014 for vacation back in my junior year of college. Doing some bar hopping, we went into the main strip's Coyote Ugly bar. I ended up sitting next to this very thin, dark-haired woman. When I asked her if it was all right if I sat there, she turned her head toward me in an incredibly slow manner. She nodded her head up and down, equally slow. I don't think anything of it. My boyfriend and I order a drink, and we're talking amongst ourselves for a minute. I'm facing away from the woman, and I feel her tap on my shoulder. So I turn around, and she's raising her glass to me in cheers. I should explain what she looks like, because it's a lot like what I imagine a demon wearing human skin would look like. Bone thin, sallow, with stringy black hair, sharp cheekbones, and nose. Her eyes were black. I mean huge black pupils that didn't blink. They looked static. She does her cheers and opens her mouth to smile, and her gums are gray. Her teeth are gray and small, and I remember having this overwhelming feeling that she wanted to eat my flesh. I'm in pretty much panic mode at this point and whip my head back toward my boyfriend. He saw this woman too by now, and he grabs me by the arm to get us to move to the back of the room as quickly as possible. I'm basically cowering. I know, super brave. I always loved reading about demons, and possibly faced with one, I'm jello. I turn to start making our way out to the street, and the woman has got her head completely cranked around to stare at me from the bar. I feel her gazing at me as we leave, and I haul ass back to the hotel. She didn't say a single word throughout the entire encounter. I always regretted not asking her to speak. I will say, my boyfriend and I talked about it after and considered the gray teeth and mouth and general craziness possibly due to drugs. But I've seen my fair share of drug addicts. Even had one try to kidnap me. And this was not the same. I think about this episode pretty often, even years later. That feeling of encountering something soulless that wanted to harm me has never diminished. This happened in October of 2019. So it was a weekend, and I figured it would be a good idea to get out of town for the day and introduce my girlfriend to my mom for the first time. She lives out on the plains on 40 acres. The house and land are 1/4 of a mile off the road into the field, with our long driveway dividing the land of 2 neighbors. We arrived around noon, and my brother and his wife also happened to be out there visiting that day, so I introduced the girlfriend to everyone and the dogs. I noticed that the loudest and most obnoxious dog, the beagle, didn't come to greet us, and my mom explained that the previous night she went to grab something from the truck, and on her way in the dog had darted out the door and ran off into the field, and still hadn't come back. This isn't all that uncommon for a dog to run off in the night and come back a couple of days later. Later that day, my mom recalls that her and my nieces were woken up around 1 a.m. to all the dogs howling and barking non-stop, just going nuts. Eventually they stop, and everyone gets to go back to sleep. We continue to have a nice quiet day out in the middle of nowhere for a few more hours, when we notice that this hawk has been flying around the same spot all day in the field. So my brother and his wife go to check it out, while I mess around doing something else. A few minutes later, my brother comes back and tells me he found the missing beagle, but something is wrong. I should go check it out before telling my mom. I follow my brother out into the field, expecting to find a dead dog. As we were walking, I see a spot of blood and think it was probably coyotes. He shows me a trail of blood that leads to a larger puddle and another trail. The dog seems to have been drug around some. The trail led to an area in the field where the dog lay. As soon as I saw the dog, something looked wrong about the scene. All the plants around him were trampled, and something looked different about him. I took a few more steps, and I realized that he was missing skin. This wasn't just a few bits missing from a fight or birds picking at him. The only fur or skin left on him was his head, tail, and paws, with very distinguished straight lines where he had been skinned. Some sick fuck had killed, skinned, and taken the pelt of our dog in the middle of the night, only a couple of 100 feet from the front door. Of course we called the cops. They took 2 hours to arrive. They took pictures. We looked around the area and noticed tire tracks, but we couldn't tell how old they were. We also found a pile of horse shit that looked pretty fresh close by. Did whoever did this ride a horse out there? To this day, the cops have never followed up with anything, and nothing else has happened. Nature cams were installed, and fences have been mended so dogs can't get out, but we still have no idea who did it. I came across the pictures on my phone today, and can't seem to bring myself to delete them. I've always been pretty sensitive, and so have quite a few people in my family. I've seen dark figures, recorded a few voices, but nothing too major before this story. It was my senior year of high school, and I had been going through a period of what some may like to call paranormal investigating with my friends. We were spending time visiting cemeteries and abandoned houses, like most teenagers do. Just having fun being scared. Well, my friend Tyler found this Ouija board in an abandoned house that he had explored a month or so back and asked me if I wanted it. You see, he knew I was into the paranormal with all the love I had for being scared. I liked scary movies, haunted houses, and anything to get the adrenaline going. So of course I said yes. My friends Alex, David, and I decided to skip school, and I asked them if they wanted to use this Ouija board with me. They were along for the ride, and we had planned to find a place to do this. My house. My house was already known to be haunted because due to some experiences that I had had in my basement. So it seemed like the appropriate choice. Now my friend David didn't believe in anything paranormal. No ghosts or any of that stuff. So he decided to film this for us. Alex is sitting across from me, and I have my hands on the eye by myself. I figured you weren't supposed to do this alone from what I had seen in movies, but we did it anyway, just to see what would happen. Alex begins to ask some questions. Basic ones at first, like, is there anyone here with us? What's your name? What do you want? Alex then asks, are you trying to hurt Chris? And nothing really happens in that moment. But I do remember this distinct chill run down my spine. I brushed it off. We decided to watch the video back on David's phone just to see what it looked like. As we're watching this back, when it comes to the question of, are you trying to hurt Chris? In the video, my head tilts back and I say yes in two different voices. One in my own voice, and one in a deep, guttural voice. We all look at each other and exclaim, oh my god. You didn't say that. You didn't say anything. And needless to say, we got rid of that board and never really talked about it again. But that was one of the most terrifying experiences I have ever had. Several years ago, I worked at a crisis unit for the acutely mentally ill. It was a 10-bed unit where individuals would come stay as a step down from a psychiatric hospitalization or a diversion to prevent psychiatric hospitalization. I often worked alone on the weekends. One Friday evening, we received an admission, Michael. Background info was provided with the referral indicating a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder and his recent release from prison after serving a sentence for murder. I completed the initial intake meeting with Michael, during which time he said some sexually explicit things to me. I made it clear that this was inappropriate and that confidentiality was limited and that the staff working on the unit as part of his treatment team would be privy to anything said in the interview or subsequent one-on-one sessions. He responded well to the redirection, which we finished the intake and I went about the rest of my shift until about 11 p.m. that night, when he approached the office and asked if I was working alone. Luckily, at the time I wasn't alone, and I told him my male co-worker was in the adjoining office. After this encounter, I explained the situation to my coworker, who read my shift summary and decided to sit down with Michael and tell him that the way he was acting was not acceptable, and that he could risk being released from the program if it continued. The next morning, I was working alone from 8 to 4 p.m. Around 9 a.m., I went to wake up another client, Jeremy, to administer his medications. The room Jeremy was assigned to was at the end of the hallway, and he was actually slow to get up in the mornings. While I was knocking on Jeremy's door, Michael approached me to tell me that he didn't appreciate that I had shared the things he said to me with my male coworker. I explained to Michael that he knew what he said was inappropriate, and that he knew anything he said to me would be shared with the rest of the treatment team. Michael became more agitated and got in my face, backing me into the corner in front of Jeremy's bedroom door. At this point, Jeremy had woken up and heard what was happening outside of his room. He came out, stood between Michael and myself, and told Michael that he needed to walk away and cool down. Michael went back to his room, and I contacted my supervisor, who told me to document the encounter and continue my shift. Needless to say, I left that job shortly after this incident. I'm thankful for Jeremy, and that he had the presence of mind, while also being a client with a mental illness, to intervene on my behalf. I often wonder what would have happened if Jeremy wouldn't have woken up, or if he would have been in a more severe state of mental illness and would have become more agitated as well. Michael, let's never meet again. It is not uncommon for me to have dreams about shadow people, or to have sleep paralysis. On this particular night, I had a dream about a red marble, and that an entity was tied to this said marble. I felt that I had to protect this marble and keep it away from people who were trying to get it. The marble bounced out of my hand, and I told the entity to roll it back to me, which it did. Here is the weird part. I remember in my dream picking up the marble, but all of a sudden I was staring up at the ceiling. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see a shadow person approaching, and it started to lean over me, looking down. At this point, I have no idea if I'm awake or if I'm dreaming, but I remember saying over and over again, "Leave, leave, leave, leave." But the voice started to sound deeper and deeper and not like mine at all. My boyfriend sleeping next to me shook me awake, and I sat up, calmed down, and went back to sleep. In the morning, I asked what had happened, and he said that I was talking in my sleep and that I had said a sentence that was all jumbled, so he couldn't make out what I was actually saying. This made me feel weird, because if I did sleep talk, I would have thought it would have been one word, over and over. I remember in my dream feeling uneasy and scared. Does this sound like I was visited? Or was it just a really bad case of sleep paralysis? Edit. I also forgot to mention that I told my mom about the dream, and what time that it had happened. And she said that she had had a terrible dream and woke up screaming around that same time. We sleep on different floors, so I didn't hear her do this, but she doesn't remember her dream. Ever since I was a kid, I had paranormal experiences. One intense rule of the house my mom gave me was never to participate in a Ouija board. When I was 14 years old, I'm now 20, I let my curiosity get the best of me and decided to do a Ouija board with a friend. In my room in the complete dark, we began the process. To my surprise, nothing happened. Later that night, I let my mind and fear get the best of me and decided to sleep with my mom, who had no clue that I had previously participated in a Ouija board, otherwise she would have killed me. As I was falling asleep, my mom asleep right next to me, I saw the silhouette of a large man in the doorway. At first, I told myself that it was just my brother. I called his name twice, then noticed that this figure was at least 6 inches taller than my brother and completely unresponsive to what I was saying. I started to panic and pray as I realized that this was not my brother and perhaps something far more evil that I had invited into the house. I was too afraid to move or to wake my mom. After about 5 minutes, though it felt like 10 years, the figure disappeared. I struggled to sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I was getting ready with my mom in the bathroom. Keep in mind that she has no idea what I had seen in her room last night, or even that I had done the Ouija board. She brings up to me a nightmare that she had had the previous night. After I asked her to tell me, the answer brought me to tears. She said that there was a demonic entity in the hallway, and as she went to touch it, it threw her across the room. As I broke down in tears and told her the truth, we proceeded to bless our house. I will never do a Ouija board again. This probably isn't the scariest of stories, but it still worries me how badly things could have gone. It was the end of a long night, nearly 10 p.m., and all my friends had just caught the last train home. 13-year-old me was standing in Hamilton Central train station waiting on my mom to come and pick me up. The bus bay was near enough deserted, and there were very few people milling about. I wasn't particularly concerned about being alone at night. I did this every week after hanging out with my friends. I had been standing there for about 15 minutes when an older, mid-30s, seemingly drunk man approached me asking for 50 pence for a bus. I told him I didn't have any money, and he wandered off to ask the other people around at the shop. He returned a few minutes later and stood beside me, occasionally looking me up and down. Despite my age, I was around 6 feet, and always looked about 16 or 17, and was pretty used to guys in their 20s hitting on me, but this guy was different. He wasn't saying anything. He was just leering at me, and alarm bells were going off left, right, and center in my brain. Just as I opened my mouth to ask him if he needed anything, he started babbling away, asking about how long it would take to walk to Glasgow, as he needed to get there before 10 or the police would put him back in jail. Instinctively, I asked him what he had been in jail for, and he gave me the biggest grin and starts telling me about how he had quote-unquote found someone fingering his bird, and so he messed him up. Long story short, he caught his girlfriend cheating on him and killed the guy. He continues like this for a few minutes, then starts moving closer to where I'm standing. I was nearly blacking out with fear, as I was completely defenseless if he were to decide to stab me or take me. Luckily, just as he got within my personal bubble, my mom pulled up, and I bolted to the car and made her drive home as fast as she could. A few years ago, my mom was sleeping downstairs, and she had an encounter with something inhuman. Anyways, I used to always get scared at night, and I would knock on their door to sleep with them. And one night, my mom heard a knock on her door, and she assumed it was me, so she said, "Come in," while still half asleep. She heard the door open, and heard something quickly patter across the ground and jump on the bed, and it began whispering in her ear and mimicking her voice. She freaked out, and opened her eyes, only to see a very skinny, small, webbed-looking creature running out of the room. Me and my dad awoke to her screaming. We believe the house was haunted because we all had paranormal experiences there. We believe it came to be haunted because the previous owners performed satanic rituals, etc. When I showed her that skinwalker picture that kind of went viral, she said they looked really similar. But we don't know if this was a skinwalker or a malvoyant spirit. My grandparents have the cattle farm that little kids' fantasies are made of, complete with Native American burial sites and a creek running all the way through. The kind of place that you explore with your siblings and cousins until you are called back for dinner at the very last possible moment. My oldest cousin used to scare the rest of us by taking us into the back pasture where my grandfather had dumped the bodies of all the dead cattle. It was effective. The ground was littered with carcasses, new and old. The smell was overwhelming, and in my child's mind, this was some sort of hallowed ground to be revered and feared. A few months had passed since we went to the graveyard, and it was spring. We went to the farm as usual that weekend, and I took off into the pastures, books and blankets in tow. I loved going out and pretending that I was the first to discover a place, like most kids. I went past the creek and the tiny island where I usually pitched camp, and decided to go all the way back to the tree line, in the back pasture. I figured that the scariest thing there were the fat, old, bloated cows waiting for a vulture to strike, and I would be well past that. When I finally got to this newly cultivated spot, I remember being so happy to be so far away from the farmhouse. There were always my 3 little sisters and 5 to 8 cousins running around, not to mention the chickens, dogs, and adults. I spread my quilt on the ground and sprawled out, soaking in the sunshine, and eventually fell asleep. The next thing I remember is the sound of horses, like in the woods. Did I mention the backwoods of the back pasture? I woke up and saw 2 men stop their horses, about 6 feet shy of the fence. They looked to be about 40. I was 13. I looked at them as they stared me dead in the eye while they dismounted. In a split second, I was running for that farmhouse and screaming for my grandfather, wishing I wouldn't have ventured out quite so far. I never did find out who they were. Last week, at the end of a long shift at a historic hotel, I saw a glimpse of a petite woman with a blonde bob and long beige coat staring up at a wall. It resembled a former manager who had worked there pre-COVID shutdown, but after a second I remembered that she wasn't back to work yet. When I realized this and looked back to where she was, no one was there. My coworker and I quickly scoured the area, but it was vacant. I wrote it off as a benign spirit, as I've experienced some friendly activity there over the years. She just seemed curious or lost. However, I was talking with this former manager on the phone a couple days later, and she told me that she'd just had a dream that she was back working at the hotel and described exactly where she was in the dream. It was the precise location where I had seen the figure. Now, I'm not sure what I believe. It's been about 8 months since this incident. I still remember it clearly. It was around 10 o'clock in the morning. My mom was in the bathroom taking a bath, so we can say that I was the only person in the house with my dog. I was feeling thirsty, so I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water and my dog followed. When I turned around after drinking the water, I saw a shadow figure. It was completely opaque, pitch dark, and had a full humanoid form. It ran from the gallery in the room that was parallel to me. At that moment, my dog started barking wildly and ran into the same room. I had a pug, and we all know pugs don't usually bark that much, but at that moment he was barking too much. I froze, wondering what to do, and when I came back to my senses I sprinted, took my dog, and locked myself into a room. Even after locking ourselves in, my dog was still growling. When my mother came out, we checked the whole house, but we couldn't find anyone. 2 months after that incident, my dog died. My dad used to work at a homeless shelter. He usually helped them find jobs and things like that. When I had to go with him, they left me in a room with a bunch of Disney VHS movies with some printout coloring pages and a bunch of colored pencils. So, a lot of these people were drug addicts or recovering, that or schizophrenic. I was there because my dad left something there, but I wanted to go to my room, which the nice lady called the room. My dad was talking to this woman outside the door, which was closed. Then the door locks. All I could hear was screaming and crying outside. The knob shook, and I walked over to unlock the door, but my gut told me that if I did, it would not be good. So then a guy began to bang on the door, screaming for me and calling me baby girl. I didn't know what to do when I heard a very loud gunshot, followed by my dad screaming for them to stop shooting due to me being behind the door. He stabbed the woman who had used her keys to lock me in that room, and she did not make it. I was okay, but in the end I just remember a very nice cop opening the door and covering my eyes while they took me outside to an ambulance. R.I.P. Miss Rose, and thank you for saving my life. I am eternally grateful. Homeless man, let's not meet again. I'm an actor at a haunted attraction in Pennsylvania. I was playing Jason on the hayride scene tonight. I hop up on the hayride and walk up and down the middle of it and scare people. This is my second year doing it, and I absolutely love this gig. But tonight, something happened that I couldn't explain. It was the second to last wagon of the evening. I was in the middle of the wagon, headed toward the front, when I got a really bad gut feeling that something was off. I got chills immediately and tried to hide the feeling of terror I had at that moment from customers. I turned my head, and to my left I saw a girl staring at me. She looked completely normal at first, until she blinked. In what seemed like hours, I saw her blink in slow motion, her eyes going from the sides and meeting at the middle. After the first blink, I saw her eyes turn completely black. She cracked a small smile while staring at me straight through my mask and into my soul. I heard her laugh inside my head. I was frozen for a moment, and she blinked again and she looked normal. My body unfroze, and I tried my best to finish the wagon. This was literally the scariest thing that's ever happened to me in my life. What did I see? So basically, me and my friend were messing around until he informed me about a part of the web so messed up and dangerous that it's illegal. I kinda thought he was bluffing, but asked to see anyway. I can't remember how he got there, but somehow he did, because he said he went on there for laughs and gags. When we got on there, everything seemed normal, until he started to see things with titles like military-grade lasers or military-grade integral silencers. As we got further in, we started seeing more things like drugs, and of course more illegal weapons. We finally just quickly scrolled through stuff since we didn't really see anything that piqued our interest, until we came across a website or something titled Daycare for Kids. When we clicked on it, we saw what looked to be a room covered in feces and blood with a caged mic in the middle. We got so scared, we closed out of the browsers as fast as possible and never went back.